Chapter 669. Ao Lai and Ao Yin were extremely close to Luo Fu. Although Lei Jiuxiao was also Luo Fan's disciple, he had been taken in later. The two of them didn't even know him, let alone have any feelings for him. Text first. Therefore, after some communication, Ao Lai and Ao Yin naturally joined the human race's camp without any hesitation. They decided to help Luo Fu resist the Yao race and Lei Jiuxiao. Luo Fu was naturally overjoyed by this. At the same time, the extraordinary insight he had developed over 100 periods allowed him to clearly understand that the great battle between the human race and the Yao race was probably not far away. Therefore, after obtaining Ao Lai and Ao Yin's support, he directly took them out of the ancestral lake and into the sky with the many floating islands. He entered the layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire, and headed for the capital of the Daluo dynasty, Tianjing. After more than 100 periods of development, the capital city had developed into a boundless continent, where the core power and resources of the entire human race were gathered. Countless powerful warriors lived in the city, and countless teleportation formations were set up in the city, connecting to the hundreds of millions of entrances to the untainted land of chaos. The teleportation formations connected the untainted land of chaos to hundreds of millions of entrances to the untainted land of chaos. When they stepped into Tianjing, Ao Lai and Ao Yin were naturally shocked. They could more directly sense the achievements that Luo Fu had made over the past 100 periods. In Tianjing, Luo Fu's wife, Guangpu, daughter Luo Guo, and son Luo Chunyang were all present. With how much Ao Lai and Ao Yin loved Luo Fu, they naturally loved them as well. When they saw each other, it was naturally a joyous occasion. At this time, in the base camp of the demon race hundreds of millions of miles away, in a world that had been transformed into a world filled with boundless demon qi, a young man surrounded by endless emperor aura, with boundless power and earth-shattering power as he opened and closed his eyes, stood high in the clouds, looking down at the tens of thousands of powerful demon race below. His face was solemn, and no one knew what he was thinking. This person was none other than Lei Jiuxiao. At this moment, Lei Jiuxiao was extremely powerful, and his cultivation had already reached the peak of the golden immortal realm. He was just a little bit away from attaining the grand unity Dao fruit and attaining the grand unity dispersal. There were even 3 earth-shattering auras hidden behind him. Every single one of these 3 auras wasn't inferior to his own. Moreover, the 3 auras faintly interweaved together and fused into one in an unimaginable manner. They seemed to be brewing some sort of unbelievable might, and once they erupted, it would obliterate the heavens and the earth and obliterate time and space. These 3 auras belonged to the 3 Son of Heaven clones that Lei Jiuxiao had created: Son of Heaven Lightning, Son of Heaven Wind, and Son of Heaven Jerome. After these 3 clones had been fostered for over 100 periods of time, they'd arrived at the peak that they could attain a long time ago. Merely in terms of cultivation, they weren't inferior to his main body in the slightest, and all of them had attained the peak of the golden immortal realm. Moreover, the essence of these 3 clones was wind, fire, and lightning. When fused together, they formed an incomparably stable and mysterious combination. They could fuse together in a mysterious way, and their cultivation and strength would increase countless times. Therefore, if Lei Jiuxiao could fuse these 3 clones together in a mysterious way, his cultivation would instantly break through the shackles, and he'd directly become a grand unity immortal. The power of his divine abilities would instantly increase by more than 10,000 times. Of course, such an increase would only be achieved with the help of external objects. Not only would it not last forever, it wouldn't improve his own cultivation either. In other words, a grand unity immortal who borrowed the power of the 3 Son of Heaven's clones would only be a grand unity dispersal immortal, but not a grand unity dispersal immortal. If he wanted to attain the grand unity Dao fruit, he'd still need to seek that final bit of luck, and he'd also need to comprehend the mysteries of the great Dao. He needed to spend a long time cultivating to achieve that. This was also the reason why Lei Jiuxiao was able to hold his own against Luo Fu for more than 100 periods without being at a disadvantage. If he didn't have the ability to increase the power of his divine abilities to the level of a grand unity immortal, how could he have resisted Luo Fu, who could use the willpower of the entire human race to unleash the power of a grand unity dispersal immortal? The demon race had probably been wiped out by the human race many years ago. At this moment, Lei Jiuxiao looked calm on the surface, but his mind was in turmoil. He couldn't calm down at all. Those two auras aren't much in themselves, but by fusing them together through some sort of fusion technique, they can actually achieve primordial unity. This level of power is enough to tip the scales of victory in the battle between me and second senior brother. Looks like there are many variables in the victory that I thought I'd win for sure. Lei Jiuxiao's mind was filled with such thoughts. Lei Jiuxiao was extremely unfamiliar with the two auras, and he had never sensed their existence. In other words, he had never seen the owner of the two auras. However, there was something that he was familiar with in the two auras. It gave him a strange sense of familiarity. It was as if the owner of the two auras had stayed in a place he was very familiar with for an infinite amount of time and was contaminated with the aura of that place. This sense made him, who had also been tempered for more than 100 periods, understand that the two auras must have been related to his sect, and they might even have been sent by his master. After the two auras appeared, they went northwest without hesitation instead of toward him. He didn't need to think to know which side they were helping, and he didn't have any illusions about it. Therefore, at this moment, he directly counted the two auras as Luo Fu's power. There was no hesitation or fluke in his mind. Suddenly, Lei Jiuxiao's mind stirred, and he thought to himself, yes, these two auras have the scent of the Void Limitless Palace. They must have just come out of the Void Wuji Palace. When he realized this, Lei Jiuxiao couldn't help but show a faint look of helplessness. Master, oh master, can't you let your disciple win just once? In his mind, there was only this kind of thought that contained faint resentment. However, Lei Jiuxiao was very rational after all. This thought disappeared without a trace as soon as it appeared. As for what his master was thinking, what plans he had, even after more than 100 periods of tempering, he still couldn't see clearly. He couldn't see through it, and he didn't dare to make wild guesses. The reason why he was feeling so resentful was because his efforts of more than 100 yuan hui had been easily erased, so he was momentarily stunned. Now that this resentment had subsided, he naturally regained his rationality. He understood that he couldn't change this fact no matter what he did, and he could only brace himself to face it. After his mind regained clarity, Lei Jiuxiao was completely sure of his previous vague premonition. The decisive battle is just around the corner. The outcome of the competition between fellow disciples has already reached the point where it must appear. He thought to himself, this kind of judgment wasn't difficult to make. After all, if it wasn't the last moment, why would his master specially let the owners of the two auras descend to balance the power of the human and demon races? Now that he was completely sure of this fact, Lei Jiuxiao naturally threw everything else to the back of his mind and began to issue orders, making the entire demon camp operate with unimaginable efficiency. The power that the entire demon race had accumulated for more than 100 periods was integrated at an unimaginable speed. In almost just a few days, they were completely ready for the decisive battle. At the same time, on the human side, Luo Fu's reaction was also extremely sharp. He also knew that it was time for the decisive battle, so after saying goodbye to Ao Lai and Ao Yin, he also mobilized all the power of the entire Daluo dynasty, preparing for the final battle with the demon race. For a time, the entire primordial world was suppressed by a storm. Boundless killing intent gradually spread out, and the entire primordial world underwent an inexplicable change. All the preparations before the battle were complete. They were only waiting for the last fuse to be lit. This kind of waiting did not take long. The fuse soon appeared. After Ao Lai and Ao Yin left the Void Wuji Palace, Luo Fan directly threw them to the back of his mind. The reason why he released Ao Lai and Ao Een at this moment was not only because they had already completed their goal of tempering themselves in the Sea of Lightning, but also because of an inexplicable whim. At Luo Fan's current realm, every thought and action contained an inexplicable truth. This kind of sudden impulse was only a kind of distracting thought for ordinary people, and it was only a kind of inspiration for ordinary cultivators. However, for him, it was a kind of result after countless calculations and deductions by the heavens. In other words, this kind of whim was a manifestation of the conclusion that emerged from the depths of Luo Fan's spirit after countless calculations. This kind of whim was naturally extremely important. He naturally would not ignore this kind of whim. So he released Ao Lai and Ao Een without hesitation. As for what the result would be after releasing the two of them, he no longer needed to care about this. After reaching the peak of the zenith heaven scattered Tao, Luo Fan's confidence in himself had reached an unshakable level. Since this kind of whim was the result of countless calculations in the depths of the spirit, he naturally believed that this method must be the best choice. Why would he still need to pay attention to it? At this moment, what he cared about was the Void Wuji Palace itself. In the past 100 billion years, although all his attention was focused on comprehending the scene of the sword madman splitting the world apart, all the mysteries of the zenith heaven scattered Tao stage were contained within. But at the same time, the spiritual power in his body was constantly tempering and changing the entire Void Wuji Palace. After his changes, the Void Wuji Palace had been completely assimilated by him, and all the connections with the primordial world had been completely cut off. However, that was all. The Void Wuji Palace itself was still not compatible with his cultivation realm. It was still only at the level of a Tai treasure. A Tai treasure was naturally infinitely powerful to a cultivator who achieved the Tai fruit of Wei. It could greatly increase the power of their techniques and increase their ability to survive by countless times. However, to Luo Fan, who achieved the Tao of the Zenith Heaven, the power of a Tai treasure was not even comparable to the power of a finger or a thought from him. Under these circumstances, a Tai treasure was an existence that was tasteless to Luo Fan and a pity to throw away. This naturally did not match Luo Fan's expectations for the Void Wuji Palace. Therefore, at this very moment, what Luo Fan needed to do was continue to transform the entire palace of the Infinite Void. He needed to make the palace of the Infinite Void reach a level that matched his cultivation level. Luo Fan floated in the air and looked down at the entire Void Wuji Palace. He was the creator of the Void Wuji Palace. At this moment, the entire Void Wuji Palace had almost become one with him, a part of his body. Naturally, nothing about the Void Wuji Palace was a secret to him. In an instant, the entire Void Wuji Palace disintegrated into countless inscriptions, talismans, and patterns in his eyes. The three-dimensional talisman ball at the core was revealed without any concealment. At this moment, in the depths of Luo Fan's mind, endless information appeared out of thin air and continuously surged into the endless information that flowed into his mind from his eyes. The information interweaved and combined with the information, causing the information about the mysteries of the everlasting Void Palace that flowed into his mind from his eyes to constantly reorganize and change. This process was the process of redesigning the entire Void Wuji Palace. Redesigning the Void Wuji Palace was naturally extremely difficult for others and would require an endless amount of time to accomplish. However, to Luo Fan, it was extremely easy. After all, he was the one who created the Void Wuji Palace. The methods to redesign and improve the Void Wuji Palace were all in his memory. All he needed to do was to extract the corresponding information from his memory and add it to the design of the Void Wuji Palace. Therefore, after a few dozen breaths, a brand new limitless Void Palace, which was many times more complicated than the current one, appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Luo Fan sensed this brand new blueprint of the limitless Void Palace. With a slight thought, he scattered it again and reorganized it again, turning it into a blueprint that was extremely similar to the previous one, but the specific details were somewhat different. After a while, he broke it up and reorganized it to create another design. Just like this, the cycle of breaking up and reorganizing continued for more than 129,600 times. After 129,600 cycles, he finally obtained the most perfect design of the Void Wuji Palace that he could currently design. After carefully observing the design of the Void Wuji Palace, Luo Fan finally confirmed that he could no longer make any changes to it. Only then did he nod with satisfaction. At this moment, it had only been less than a quarter of an hour since he began to redesign the Void Wuji Palace. After solving the design, Luo Fan looked down and saw that the entire Void Wuji Palace had undergone earth-shaking changes. The palaces that represented the 3001 worlds had left the boundless yellow land and gathered together in the void. They were like building blocks that formed a strange sphere. In the center of this sphere was the palace that represented the dimensional realm. This palace exuded an indescribable traction force that connected the other 3,000 palaces. The 3,000 palaces that represented the minor kiliocosm resonated with the palace in the center. Outside the 3001 palaces, there was a formless energy restricting the 3001 palaces, allowing them to maintain their stability. They would not collapse, nor would they collapse. This was what Luo Fan ordered the Limitless Boy to do. Although Luo Fan wanted to remodel and upgrade the entire Limitless Void Palace, it was impossible for him to completely abandon the 3,000 minor kiliocosm and a medium kiliocosm that originally existed in the Limitless Void Palace. It was unknown how many billions and billions of creatures lived in those worlds. Not to mention him, he had spent countless billions of years to cultivate and create these worlds. It was something that he could not bear to abandon. What the Limitless Boy was doing at this time was using his special identity as the treasure spirit of the Void Wuji Palace to isolate the 3001 worlds from the Void Wuji Palace. This allowed the 3001 worlds to form their own entity in a short period of time. This way, the power of Luo Fan's reforging of the Void Wuji Palace would not be able to affect these worlds. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that he could do it freely. With a wave of his hand, the sphere formed by the 3001 palaces was pushed aside by him. It turned into a half-real, half-illusory existence, as if it was hidden in another time and space. The connection with the Void Wuji Palace seemed to be completely cut off. Then, he raised his hand and grabbed at the air. The boundless yellow earth below suddenly boiled. An endless lightning flashed from the yellow earth, instantly turning the boundless yellow earth into an earthy yellow sea that grew millions of times in size. This piece of yellow land was formed by the accumulation of endless earth thunders. The amount of earth thunders it contained was so terrifying that it reached an earth-shattering level. If it exploded, the land within a radius of billions of miles in the untainted world could be directly turned into nothingness. Even the void could be shattered by this unimaginable power. At this moment, this change was the earth lightning turning from solid to liquid. From the original solid earth lightning, it turned into liquid earth lightning. This transformation naturally greatly increased its size, causing its size to increase by millions of times. Luo Fan floated above the boundless thunder sea. Countless complex and mysterious characters, talismans, runes, and patterns flashed through his eyes. He raised his hand and grabbed at the air. The entire thunder sea began to spin around a strange point in the center. This way of rotation was extremely mysterious. Every drop of thunder water did not simply move in a circle around that point. Instead, they swam according to some indescribable and mysterious trajectory. When all the thunder water gathered together, the rotation of the entire thunder sea became extremely mysterious. Unknowingly, it even formed a strange pattern. This pattern was extremely complicated and mysterious. It seemed to be a strange rune, but it also seemed to be a strange talisman. It also seemed to be just countless incredible patterns intertwined together. Chapter 670. When the entire Sea of Lightning was mobilized, all the lightning water in the Sea of Lightning was added to the whirlpool and turned into a part of the pattern. At the center of the pattern, where all the lightning water in the Sea of Lightning revolved, the whirlpool began to spin. All of a sudden, an incomparably strange thunderbolt was generated. The formation of this thunderbolt was like pushing down the first domino. Endless thunderbolts were generated from that point. Together with the first thunderbolt, they shot out from that point, according to some incomparably wonderful, abstruse, and complicated method. They merged into the entire sea of thunderbolts and began to circulate and outline the huge pattern according to some incomparably complicated and abstruse trajectory. The thunderbolt was pure and condensed, white, and indescribably sharp. It was as if the space and time of the universe could not remain intact in front of it and would be directly torn apart. This was a kind of metal element. This thunderbolt was a type of metal element thunder. Obviously, the enormous diagram formed by the earth lightning contains some sort of indescribable secret, and it contains some sort of inconceivable truth. Thus, it was able to form metal lightning according to the profundities of earth and metal. The metal element thunder was continuously generated, and the speed at which it was generated became faster and faster. In the beginning, there were only streaks of lightning. However, the streaks of lightning were like the Milky Way from the ninth heaven. They gushed out from the small dot in the middle in a frenzy and merged with the surrounding unparalleled formation. Gradually, they blended together with the boundless, earthly, lightning sea. More and more traces of white lightning were added to the boundless, earthly yellow pattern. The moment the metal element thunder was born, the magic power in Luo Fan's body began to be consumed at an unimaginable speed. The speed of this consumption was enough to exhaust the magic power in his body in almost an instant. It was even enough to cause his Zenith Heaven Tao fruit, which was completely constructed from magic power units, to collapse and perish. For cultivators who cultivated other great paths, even if they became Zenith Heaven Golden Celestials, they would not be able to sustain such a speed for even an instant. But for Luo Fan, this was nothing. The results of trillions of years of cultivation were displayed in an instant. As his magic power was consumed, there were endless magic power units surging out from the world of his sea of consciousness, constantly replenishing this earth-shattering consumption that was enough to directly exhaust a Zenith Heaven Golden Celestial. The reason for this was quite simple. After Luo Fan's Sea of Consciousness had undergone countless years of changes and refinement, it had long since become an incomparably complete and realistic huge world constructed entirely from his magical power units. Since it was a real, complete world, it was naturally self-sufficient and self-sufficient. Naturally, it could produce an endless amount of vitality on its own. And because this world was built with Luo Fan's magic power units as the foundation, it was naturally not a complicated matter for the vitality it produced to condense into real magic power units. Therefore, when the magic power in his body was consumed beyond imagination, there would naturally be endless vitality born naturally and condensed into infinite magic power units that flowed out of the Sea of Consciousness to replenish the various consumption in his body. The Sea of Consciousness was a vast and boundless world. Under normal circumstances, although it could produce a huge amount of yuan qi at every moment, it could only make up for the consumption of the numerous living beings in the Sea of Consciousness. At most, it could only increase the strength of the entire Sea of Consciousness a little and move towards the goal of sublimation and metamorphosis. The reason for this was not that the Sea of Consciousness could only produce so much vitality, but the endurance of the entire Sea of Consciousness could only be so. After all, the endurance of a world was limited, and it was not better to increase vitality faster. In fact, if the amount of vitality increased too much in a short period of time, it would directly cause the entire world to change, and the many living beings in the world would not be able to bear it. As a result, there would be all kinds of consumption that should not have appeared, and the world would be damaged because of this. This was like a person who could not bear too much power in a short period of time. If the power was beyond what one could bear, it would not allow that person to instantly become an extremely strong powerhouse. Instead, it would only cause that person's body to collapse or even explode under the power. Therefore, the vitality generation ability of this sea of consciousness was not limited to the original vitality generation speed, but it was tens of thousands of times stronger than the original vitality generation speed. This was also the fundamental reason why Luo Fan attached so much importance to this sea of consciousness and was determined to transform this sea of consciousness from illusory to real. If he didn't possess this extremely formidable origin energy that far surpassed his main body's Dao fruit, then it could only be considered to be of little value to him. Even though it couldn't be said to be completely unnecessary, its importance would absolutely not be to such an extent. At this moment, when the consumption rate of Luo Fan's magic power reached such an astonishing degree, the vitality generation ability of this sea of consciousness was completely mobilized. No matter how fast the magic power in Luo Fan's body was consumed, no matter how great the loss of his magic power was, he could easily generate the corresponding number of magic power units and easily make up for it. He did not even need to activate the ability of the Zenith Heaven Way fruit to generate magic power units out of thin air. The reason why the magic power in Luo Fan's body had such an earth-shattering consumption was naturally because of the infinite metal thunders that were generated out of thin air in the sea of thunder below. Luo Fan had already achieved the Zenith Heaven Way fruit and even reached the peak of the Zenith Heaven Way. He had reached the point where he could directly break through the barrier and achieve the Zenith Heaven Way. Naturally, he could be independent and self-sufficient. No matter how much magic power he consumed, he could generate the same amount of magic power through the various changes in his body to supplement the consumption. Although the Void Wuji Palace had been integrated with him to a certain extent and also had some of the characteristics that he had, it was after all just a primordial unity treasure that was barely achieved. The world inside might be able to generate all kinds of pneuma out of thin air, but it could only replenish the consumption of each world. It could never break through the world and condense these metal thunders that appeared out of thin air. Obviously, these metal thunders could not be generated out of thin air. Naturally, they could only find the energy source from Luo Fan, who was integrated with the Void Wuji Palace to a certain extent. It was precisely because of this that at this moment, the magic power in Luo Fan's body was being consumed at an alarming rate. The amount of magic power in Luo Fan's body was earth-shattering. Not to mention the disbanded immortals of the Zenith Heaven who practiced other great ways, it was tens of thousands of times more than the golden immortals of the Zenith Heaven. Although the amount of these metal thunders produced at every moment was unimaginable, it did not exceed the ability of the magic power in his body to replenish it. Luo Fan floated above the void and looked down at the huge vortex below. He looked at the constantly increasing white and sharp light in the vortex. Under his eyes, the words, patterns, three-dimensional talismans, and lines were still pouring out as quickly as before. His mind was tightly attached to the whole Void Wuji Palace, controlling even the slightest change in it. Time passed by slowly. Although the speed of the birth of the metal thunders was beyond imagination, the sea of thunder was too big. Degree when the number of metal thunders produced was roughly equal to the number of liquid earth thunders in the sea of earth thunder, forming a rough balance. 12,960 years had already passed. On this day, after 12,960 years, the Sea of Thunder had grown to twice its original size, and the whole Sea of Thunder had turned white and yellow. The white and yellow colors were mixed together in some mysterious, complicated, delicate, and mysterious way, making the original complex and mysterious huge vortex and the huge pattern even more complex and mysterious. It even faintly revealed strands of incomparably profound and wondrous aura. This aura was indistinct and indistinct, as if it possessed some sort of inconceivable quality. However, because it was too fine and obscure, this quality could not truly take form. It was still in the incubation stage, so it could not be completely displayed. When the balance was completely established, the entire gigantic vortex and pattern suddenly shook slightly. Then, a blue thunderbolt replaced the position of the white thunderbolt and started to rush out from the center of the pattern. It directly converged into the huge vortex and started to merge into the huge pattern, adding a more and more obvious blue color to the original white and yellow pattern. With the formation of this blue thunderbolt, endless blue thunderbolts surged out, converging into the huge pattern at a speed comparable to the white thunderbolt from before. This blue thunderbolt seemed to have infinite tolerance and penetration ability, as if it could contain anything and nothing could stop it from penetrating. It resonated with the heaviness of the earth thunder and the sharpness of the metal thunder, faintly producing some kind of incredible effect. This blue thunderbolt was none other than the water thunder. Earth gave birth to metal, and metal gave birth to water. The earth thunder converged to form the metal thunder, and the metal thunder converged to form the earth thunder. The source of the formation of the water thunder still came from Luo Fan. Fortunately, after the previous 12,960 years, Luo Fan was already familiar with this frequency of mana extraction, so he did not have any reaction to supporting the power produced by the water thunder. There was not even the slightest change on his face compared to before. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, another 12,960 years had passed. These water thunder finally formed a certain balance with the metal thunder and earth thunder in the pattern. At this moment, the huge vortex, the huge pattern, the huge formation, and the huge sea of lightning also expanded to more than 3 times its original size because of the appearance of these water thunder. Moreover, the strange pattern formed by the vortex had become even more complicated, profound, and unbelievable because of this. It was to the extent that the strange aura that was still in the brewing stage was much stronger than it was 12,960 years ago. However, it was still in the cloud year stage. It was still faintly discernible, and it still couldn't display its true form. The change did not stop because of this change. The moment the balance was established, endless green thunderbolts surged out from the small dot in the middle and converged into the huge vortex and the huge pattern. The green thunderbolts contained endless vitality and also an indescribable firmness. That was impressively the wood thunder. Earth gave birth to metal, metal gave birth to water, water gave birth to wood, nothing more than that. After 12,690 years, a new balance was established once again. These wood thunder finally reached the level where they formed a brand new whole with the earth thunder, metal thunder, and water thunder, a brand new whirlpool, and a brand new pattern. At this moment, the size of the entire sea of lightning had expanded to more than 4 times its original size. As for the aura that was brewing, it had already reached the level where a clue had appeared. However, it was only a clue. Although Luo Fan had some understanding in his heart, he was not completely sure what that aura was. The moment the balance formed by the 4 kinds of thunderbolts was established, endless red thunderbolts poured out of the tiny spot in the center of the whirlpool, which had already generated boundless metal, water, and wood thunderbolts. They constantly converged into the huge whirlpool, adding more complexity and mysteries to the already complicated and abstruse whirlpool. The red thunderbolts contained endless explosiveness and also some indescribable hope. It was the fire thunder. It was in accordance with the mutual generation of the 5 elements, and the principle that earth gave birth to metal, metal gave birth to water, water gave birth to wood, and wood gave birth to fire. In the blink of an eye, another 12,960 years had passed. It was still 12,960 years, a year that was in accordance with some kind of great Tao. From the time Luo Fan wanted to refine the Void Wuji Palace until now, 51,840 years had passed. Even in the untainted world, this period of time was almost 4 years. On this day, 12,960 years after the fire lightning surged out from the middle of the whirlpool, the number of fire lightning gradually reached a balance with the earth lightning, metal lightning, water lightning, and wood lightning. The size of the entire lightning sea had also increased to nearly 5 times its initial size due to the addition of the fire lightning. The huge pattern formed by the whole vortex was even more profound and mysterious to an unimaginable extent. Such a complex and mysterious pattern had even reached the point where even a cultivator with the cultivation of a primordial unity, golden immortal, would not be able to bear it and would fall into a state of improper behavior because of this pattern. At this time, Luo Fan was still hovering in the void, looking down at the sea of lightning. Suddenly, his body, which had not moved for more than 51,000 years, shook slightly. He raised his hand and pointed at the center of the vortex, shouting, "If we don't do it now, when will we?" As he pointed and shouted, the last fiery red thunderbolt rushed out from the center of the vortex. This fiery red thunderbolt was directly injected into the vortex and merged into the huge formation that had already become boundless and mysterious, and even a primordial unity, golden immortal, could not bear it. When it entered, it was like a drop of water dripping into hot oil that was already emitting smoke. In an instant, it caused an earth-shattering change in the entire formation. The huge pattern, which had been extremely stable for more than 50,000 years like a drawing on an ordinary piece of paper, suddenly moved. The originally yellow, white, blue, green, and red thunderbolts began to swirl and change constantly. Among the various colors, some kind of indistinct conversion began to take place. The yellow color flowed to the white color flowed to the blue color flowed to the green color flowed to the red color, and the red color once again flowed to the yellow color. The 5 colors changed rapidly at an unimaginable speed. Gradually, the distinct colors between the 5 colors began to blur. The degree of vagueness kept increasing and increasing. In the end, they were all mixed together, forming a completely different color from the previous 5 colors, but it wasn't formed by the 5 colors mixed together. It was a brand new color. At this moment, the aura that had been faintly discernible and constantly brewing for the past 50,000 years finally broke through all barriers and was completely revealed. Chaos. It was actually the aura of chaos. It seemed like everything was contained within it, yet it also seemed like nothing existed within it. Even time and space could not exist stably within it. At this time, the huge vortex formed by the 5 colors of thunderbolts finally stopped transforming and turned into a boundless sea of gray lightning. The Chaos Sea of Lightning. The moment the Chaos Sea of Lightning was formed, the huge vortex that had existed for more than 50,000 years, the huge pattern, and the endless 3-dimensional seals, runes, and patterns contained within the pattern all disappeared. The entire Sea of Lightning seemed calm and indescribably tyrannical. It seemed to be flowing in an indescribably mysterious way, yet it also seemed to be fixed and unchanging. This Sea of Lightning was not filled with other types of thunderbolts, but chaos thunder. The most original, most fundamental, and most mysterious chaos thunder. This type of chaos thunder had another name in the legends, Great Heaven Chaos Thunder. It was a supreme thunder that could split open a world and destroy a world. Luo Fan looked at this chaotic sea of thunder, and the speed at which the endless characters, talismans, runes, and vein patterns poured out from his eyes became even faster. If he just looked at them pouring out, he would even suspect whether his eyes would directly explode because of this kind of torrential pouring out. Chapter 671. It contained infinite power and all kinds of incredible mysterious characteristics. All existences related to chaos had some special characteristics that only chaos had. The Deuteon Chaos Divine Thunder was no exception. There is an unimaginable amount of Deuteon Chaos Divine Thunder in the entire Chaos Thunder Sea. If it exploded, although it couldn't make the entire untainted land return to chaos, it was absolutely not a problem to make thousands of worlds return to nothingness. Looking at the chaotic sea of lightning roiling below, a thought flashed through his mind. He raised his hand and pressed down. In an instant, the 3001 palaces that he had preserved in a seemingly illusory and seemingly another space-time, by some mysterious means more than 50,000 years ago, trembled slightly. They broke away from that seemingly other space-time and re-entered the space-time inside the void Wuji Palace. Following that, the 3001 palaces suddenly dispersed. From their original spherical shape, they scattered into a sky full of stars, forming an extremely mysterious formation that rapidly shot down towards the chaos lightning sea below. In the blink of an eye, the 3001 palaces that represented the 3001 worlds directly rushed into the chaos thunder sea below. At the moment when they rushed in, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. He took a step forward and directly crossed the void, following the 3001 palaces directly into the chaos thunder sea. The Du Tian Chaos Divine Thunder had incredible destructive power and also incredible creation. If an ordinary creature or even an ordinary cultivator came into contact with such a small strand, they would be directly destroyed by the Du Tian Chaos Divine Thunder, and then completely devoured and turned into a part of the Du Tian Chaos Divine Thunder. The Du Tian Chaos Divine Thunder that had condensed into a liquid form in front of him had already reached an incredible number. Its destructive power and creativity were billions of times stronger than a single strand of Du Tian Chaos Divine Thunder. It could be said that if other cultivators, even if they had the supreme cultivation of a Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal, they would absolutely not be able to easily step into this Chaos Thunder Sea, not to mention going deep into it. Even if they stepped on the surface of the Chaos Thunder Sea, they would be directly annihilated by the Chaos Thunder Sea. However, this was only for other cultivators. For Luo Fan, this kind of situation was naturally impossible to happen. Not to mention the fact that this place was within the infinite void palace that he had forged. The endless Du Tian Chaos Divine Lightning below was formed from his magic power. No matter how powerful the Chaos Divine Lightning was, there was bound to be traces of Luo Fan's imprint in the depths of its source. And as long as this trace of imprint existed, it was enough to prevent the Metropolis Chaos Divine Lightning from causing any harm to Luo Fan. That was why Luo Fan was able to enter the chaotic sea of lightning in such a composed and indifferent manner without any hesitation. After entering the sea of lightning, Luo Fan looked around. His gaze pierced through the boundless chaotic colors, and he saw everything that existed in the depths of the sea of lightning. After the 3001 palaces entered the chaotic sea of lightning, all of them melted and dissipated at an unimaginable speed. By the time Luo Fan saw them clearly, the 3001 palaces had already turned into 3001 strange balls of light. These balls of light were indescribably dazzling, but the shape of each ball of light was not a complete sphere. Instead, according to some incomparably unique law, they formed incomparably complex and mysterious shapes. Moreover, these shapes had not completely stabilized at this moment. Instead, under the influence of the boundless Metropolis Chaos Divine Lightning, they were like unpolished jade that was constantly being polished. They constantly changed forms, making them more and more mysterious, more and more unbelievable, and more in line with some inexplicable principle. This kind of polishing speed was naturally quite fast. In just a few breaths, it was completely over, and the shapes of the 3001 balls of light completely stabilized. After it stabilized, the 3001 balls of light attracted each other, gradually forming an extremely mysterious sphere within the sea of chaos lightning. This sphere was similar to an ellipse, but it was not a true, perfect ellipse. Instead, it had some kind of strange deviation, and it was this strange deviation that made the ellipse even more mysterious, as if it was describing some great Tao principle and some profound mysteries of the world. After the ellipse was formed, its weight seemed to increase by countless times, and it gradually began to sink into the depths of the chaotic sea of lightning. The light of wisdom constantly flickered in Luo Fan's eyes. In the blink of an eye, he completely understood everything he was about to do. His body jerked, and he took a step forward. In an instant, he arrived at a certain position in the center of the chaotic sea of lightning. As he moved, the continuously sinking ellipse below also moved along with him. At this moment, Luo Fan happened to be standing somewhere above the sphere, and there was an extremely mysterious distance between them. After standing still, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He slowly closed his eyes and completely relaxed his body. The constantly flowing Fa Li in his body also gradually calmed down during this process. In just an instant, he was in a completely different state from before. In fact, it could be said to be the complete opposite of before. After a few breaths, his body jerked, and he suddenly moved from extreme stillness to extreme movement. In an instant, even the tiniest part of his body, even the hidden magic power within him, and even his Zenith Heaven Tao fruit were completely mobilized by him in an instant. As this change occurred, he raised his right hand slightly and twisted his body slightly. In a flash, he had already connected with some indescribable, profound mystery. Although it was just a small change in posture, it seemed like he had absorbed power that could rival the entire primordial world into his body. It could be said that just this change in posture already contained the infinite truth of martial arts and the mysteries of the great Tao. If a cultivator who was interested in martial arts saw Luo Fan's posture, they would definitely feel as if they were directly facing the most fundamental martial arts. They would be greatly enlightened and even directly advanced by leaps and bounds, obtaining an unbelievable improvement. At this moment, Luo Fan had already devoted all his mind, all his energy, and all his attention to what he was about to do next. Naturally, he did not have the mood to think about all these random things. His body seemed to be bound and suppressed by an endless world, and he began to move in an extremely slow and heavy manner. His right hand slowly pressed down from top to bottom. This extremely slow movement could not even stir the air, but at this time and place when Luo Fan used it, it produced an unbelievable effect. This sound contained boundless majesty and boundless mysteriousness. If each sound were to spread out, it would be enough to destroy the starry sky and turn mountains into powder. However, in this Wuji palace, compared to the boundless chaotic sea of lightning, this sound was nothing at all. It could not even attract the slightest bit of attention from others. At the same time, under his action, the boundless chaotic sea of lightning began to shake at a speed that was far faster than when it had just been formed. Every strand of chaotic divine lightning in the entire chaotic sea of lightning seemed to be attracted by an indescribable power. The chaotic sea of lightning, which was originally rolling endlessly, instantly became boiling. Countless unbelievable scenes flashed crazily above the chaotic sea of lightning. Everything that existed in the primordial world, whether it existed or did not exist, as the chaotic sea of lightning churned, on its surface, in its depths, and inside, it began to form, disappear, and reappear at an even faster speed. In this way, it formed an endless cycle. However, the changes around Luo Fan's body were even more intense and unbelievable. The chaotic divine lightning around Luo Fan gathered towards Luo Fan's right hand at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, the chaotic divine lightning under Luo Fan's hand broke through the shackles of the liquid state and condensed into more and more solid chaotic divine lightning. These solid chaotic divine lightning were gray in color and emitted an extremely chaotic aura. They seemed to be extremely sturdy, and no power could harm them at all. At the same time, they seemed to be extremely fragile and violent. With just a light touch, they would collapse with a destructive force that could destroy the heavens and the earth. As Luo Fan's right hand chopped down, these solid chaotic divine lightning increased in number and size. In the blink of an eye, they had condensed into a large piece of gray rock that had just appeared, blocking under Luo Fan's right hand. It blocked Luo Fan's right hand, as if it wanted to completely freeze his right hand. Luo Fan seemed to have expected this. His expression did not change at all. Every part of his body was constantly adjusting, and every adjustment contained unimaginable mysteries. Every adjustment was in accordance with some kind of mysterious principle. Every adjustment added a wisp of mysterious aura to his body, and the power of his right hand chopping down increased by several times. During this process, the changes in the entire chaotic sea of lightning had reached an unimaginable extreme. The various changing lights and shadows had unknowingly gathered together, forming billions of mysterious and unbelievable worlds that were arranged inside and outside the entire chaotic sea of lightning. After these changes, the entire chaotic sea of lightning seemed to have been formed by billions of mysterious and unbelievable worlds. It was even impossible to see the original form of the chaotic sea of lightning. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was in the center of the chaotic sea of lightning, was like a god of creation surrounded by billions of mysterious and unbelievable worlds. His figure seemed to have become incomparably tall and majestic. Every movement and every slightest change on his body was magnified countless times during this process. From an extremely obscure method, it became so obvious that even a blind person could see it easily. Luo Fan's movements were still unhurried. However, even though the solid formed by the boundless Du Tian chaotic divine lightning continued to condense, thicken, and strengthen, it was unable to obstruct his movements at all. His movements were not affected in the slightest. They did not change in the slightest, nor did they slow down in the slightest. The Du Tian primal chaos divine lightning condensed in his hand was split apart by his right hand, and boundless Du Tian primal chaos divine lightning erupted from within, destroying countless worlds formed by the light and shadows around him. During this process, there seemed to be a brand new power mixed in. However, although the nature of this power was mysterious, it was too little and too weak compared to the chaotic divine lightning. It could not be maintained at all, and was directly annihilated by the boundless chaotic divine lightning in the surroundings, disappearing without a trace. Although the speed at which Luo Fan chopped down was slow, it would eventually reach the end. Not long after, his hand gesture had already reached the end. At this time, Luo Fan did not stop. Instead, he turned his hand and directly chopped horizontally, slowly drawing an incomparably mysterious trajectory. At the same time, his body and his magic power also changed. In a trance, there seemed to be all kinds of inexplicable mysteries appearing out of thin air in his mind, making him seem to understand many mysteries that he had not understood in the past. This change did not directly allow him to break through the barrier between the Daluo loose path and the Daluo true path, but it made him feel that he had a deeper understanding of himself. Many mysteries that he only knew in the past, but did not know why, seemed to have become clearer and clearer. The endless Du Tian primal chaos divine thunder continued to condense in Luo Fan's hand. No matter which direction his hand moved, no matter how mysterious the trajectory was, there was no pause. When his right hand chopped horizontally to the end, Luo Fan turned again, the direction of his right hand slightly tilted and slightly chopped upwards, drawing an equally mysterious and incredible trajectory. In this way, Luo Fan stood in the boundless chaotic divine lightning, constantly using his right hand to chop. Every time he chopped, it was in accordance with some kind of incredible law, triggering the endless changes in the entire chaotic divine lightning, causing more and more chaotic divine lightning to condense in his right hand. Time passed slowly, and no one knew how long it had been. The rumbling caused by the solid chaotic divine lightning being shattered was so loud that it could even condense into a solid substance and distort the space of the primordial world. Luo Fan had already chopped hundreds of millions of times, and the range of his attacks had even expanded to a radius of several hundred kilometers. By now, the entire chaotic divine lightning was completely under his control. Every time he chopped with his right hand, he would cause the endless chaotic divine lightning contained in the entire chaotic divine lightning to condense under his right hand. At this time, Although the billions of worlds that had replaced the existence of the entire chaotic divine lightning had not completely disappeared, they were being born and destroyed at an unimaginable speed. When almost all of the chaotic divine lightning condensed under Luo Fan's hand and became solid, the billions of worlds completely disappeared. And when these solids were destroyed by Luo Fan, the billions of worlds were instantly reborn. After each cycle of destruction and creation, the billions of worlds would undergo some sort of extremely subtle and incredible change. It was as if each world had become more real and complete. The magical power produced by every time the solid chaotic divine lightning was shattered was becoming more and more obvious, and the time it lasted was also becoming longer and longer. And at this time, the characteristics of that power had also been fully displayed. It was a combination of time and space, a power completely composed of countless time and space. What Luo Fan had done during this period of time was no longer unexplainable at this moment. He was impressively creating a world. In the Wuji Palace of the Void, he made use of the various mysteries he had comprehended from the moment the sword lunatic split the heavens and the earth in the past trillions of years, and with the endless chaos divine lightning as the foundation, he prepared to open up a number of worlds. This Void Wuji Palace itself was a heavenly abode magic treasure, and its nature depended on the number and level of the worlds inside it. If he wanted to upgrade this Void Wuji Palace from the level of a Primordial Unity treasure to a level that was compatible with his current cultivation realm, he naturally needed to open up more and more high-level worlds inside. Because of this, it was naturally extremely necessary for Luo Fan to open up a world in this Void Wuji Palace. And all kinds of understanding that Luo Fan had over the years were obtained from the scene of the sword lunatic creating the world, and he was naturally quite familiar with the creation of the world. With his cultivation realm of the Zenith Heaven dispersing Tao, it was naturally impossible for him to really create a truly complete and perfect world in the chaos, which is at the same level as the untainted world, but it was still possible to create a world like the boundless world. Therefore, with Luo Fan's own ability, it was possible for him to directly raise the level of this Void Wuji Palace by creating a world. Under these two conditions, what Luo Fan was doing at this time was, of course, reasonable. After going through this action for a long time, Luo Fan had already been completely immersed in this action that was similar to the creation of the world. Between his mind and thoughts, there were endless mysteries of the Great Way, and the truth of the universe emerged from it, constantly comparing with all kinds of mysteries that he had comprehended in the past, making him feel that his cultivation realm had obtained an unimaginable sublimation in this process. This sublimation was not the improvement of the cultivation realm, but the real connection of all kinds of understanding that existed only in theory in the past, making him feel that he had a more perfect control of the various powers that he possessed, and a more intuitive understanding. After an unknown period of time, Luo Fan's mind shook, and in an instant his mind was covered by an overwhelming lightning that covered everything. With this change, his right hand gently swept in a certain direction. The power composed of infinite space-time was instantly generated and continued to condense in an unimaginable way, and finally turned into nearly 10 million complete worlds. Chapter 672. These worlds, along with the dimensional realm and 3,000 minor realms that had previously existed in the sea of soul chaos thunder, formed a mysterious and mysterious whole. Text. Look, that boundless world occupied the center of the sea of soul chaos thunder. The entire boundless world exuded an endless and mysterious brilliance. This brilliance was very mysterious and contained an incredible power. There was a trace of a mysterious aura, as if it was constantly evolving all sorts of supreme truths of the great Tao of the world. From the outside, the entire boundless world looked like a shining sphere. Its surface was incomparably smooth, and the entire sphere appeared incomparably perfect. At first glance, one would feel that this was a complete sphere. Such a sphere was truly and absolutely orderly. Outside of this great world, There were 3,000 dimensional worlds that were thousands of times smaller than the Great World. They were slowly revolving around this great world in some mysterious and complicated way, but also in accordance with some unfathomable mysteries. As they revolved, they formed an incomparably mysterious array. These dimensional realms weren't spheres, but groups of strange shapes. Although some of them were similar to spheres, most of them were in the shape of magic treasures. Of course, they were only somewhat similar. After all, these were dimensional realms, and it was impossible for them to take the form of magic treasures. Outside of these 3,000 dimensional realms, there were also 3,000 minor realms revolving around each of these dimensional realms. Each of these mini-kiliocosm was just a cluster of light that had no complete form and appeared to be constantly changing, as if some kind of essential change was taking place at every moment. These lights constantly revolved around the dimensional realms. The orbit of each minor realm was incomparably mysterious and complex, as if they were outlining all sorts of inconceivable truths of the great Tao. The mysteries of the universe seemed to be evolving all sorts of different great Tao of the world. This boundless world, 3,000 dimensional realms, and 9 million minor realms formed a huge system composed of 3 levels. This huge system was so complex and mysterious. Every world in the entire system was secretly in accordance with some sort of law, and was evolving some sort of incomparably mysterious truth. At first glance, these nearly 10 million worlds seemed incomparably vast. But upon closer inspection, one would find that the position of each world was so mysterious, and they all possessed some sort of inconceivable necessity. If the entire system lacked any one of these worlds, even a minor realm would instantly become incomplete and might even collapse. In this incomparably complete system, each world had some sort of subtle connection with all the other worlds. This connection formed some sort of inexplicable flow between any 2 worlds. And this kind of flow caused these nearly 10 million worlds to slowly improve in an inexplicable way. After the appearance of these nearly 10 million worlds, the entire boundless sea of Hun Chaos Thunder had almost completely disappeared. The boundless Hun Chaos Divine Lightning that was originally contained within the entire sea of Hun Chaos Thunder could no longer maintain its liquid state. Only hundreds of billions of Hun Chaos Divine Lightning were left shuttling between the worlds, as if they were being constantly swallowed by the nearly 10 million worlds. Among them, the one that swallowed the most Hun Chaos Divine Lightning was naturally the one in the center. The 3,000 dimensional realms around the Great Thousand Worlds swallowed the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning thousands of times less than the Great Thousand World. Moreover, the Minor Thousand Worlds were several thousand times smaller than the Minor Thousand Worlds. Only a tiny wisp of heavenly chaos divine thunder would occasionally be swallowed by the Minor Thousand Worlds. And every time these worlds swallowed the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning, it would cause the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning to grow a little stronger. When all the worlds merged together, the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning in the entire sea of Hun Chaos Divine Lightning was gradually recovering. Although it would take at least trillions of years for it to truly recover to its original state, it was still showing signs of recovery. However, there was still signs of recovery, and there was a qualitative difference compared to not being able to return at all. The reason why the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning would grow a little stronger after being swallowed by those worlds was not complicated. It was because these nearly 10 million worlds were complete worlds. Every world, even if it was a Great Thousand World, could be self-sufficient and generate yuan qi out of thin air. And as the worlds that Luo Fan had opened up in the boundless sea of Hun Chaos Divine Lightning, these worlds had an indescribable degree of compatibility with the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning. At this time, the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning was in urgent need of replenishment and strengthening, so these worlds would naturally help it. Naturally, they would generate endless yuan qi out of thin air to feed the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning. to meet the needs of the Hun Chaos Divine Lightning. At this time, Luo Fan was hovering in the void with his hands hanging low and his eyes closed. His expression was calm and indifferent to the extreme. At this moment, his mind wasn't as calm as he seemed on the surface, and it was surging instead. It was practically filled with boundless information and filled with countless unbelievable profundities of the Grand Tao. The cultivation realm that Luo Fan possessed at this time was originally improved through countless experiences of the scene of Crazy Sword splitting open the world. It could be said that everything he comprehended at this time, if traced back to the source, was the creation of the world. Therefore, for him, the creation of the world was more important than any other cultivator. For other cultivators, the Genesis Splitter was a supreme divine ability, a marvelous technique that contained the supreme principles of the Tao. Being able to observe it was a great fortune, an opportunity that could allow their cultivation to improve greatly. But that was all. For them, the creation of the world was a dispensable existence. To be able to observe it was naturally a blessing, but if they could not observe it, they would just lose this blessing. It would not harm them at all. But for Luo Fan, it was not so. The significance of the creation of the world was not as dispensable to him as it was to other cultivators. It was a vital and irreplaceable existence. If he had not personally created the world, then everything he had comprehended in the past would be like a pavilion in the air. Even if he thought that his foundation was solid, it would not be as light as a feather. At this moment, although Luo Fan was not creating the world in the chaotic state of Han, he was only creating some big, medium-sized, and small worlds in the sea of Hun chaotic divine lightning in his magic treasure. But this alone had already given him unimaginable gains. The endless changes that occurred at the moment of the creation of the world filled his mind, making him feel that he had an unprecedented understanding of the essence of the creation of the world. In the past, he could only comprehend a little bit of the mysteries of the great Tao and the wonders of the universe through the scene of the creation of the world by lunatic Jian. At this moment, they surged towards him in an incomparably intuitive way. In a trance, Luo Fan only felt that his foundation was becoming more stable and stronger in a completely different way than before. The application of the power of all kinds of magical powers appeared in his mind. These incredible ways of application made him suddenly feel that his previous application of the power of magical powers was so shallow and wasteful. In the process of eagerly seeking the mysterious truths that Luo Fan had comprehended through the creation of the world, time gradually passed. In the blink of an eye, another 100 years had passed. One day after 100 years, Luo Fan finally broke away from that process. He slowly opened his eyes. There was a sense of loss on his face, but also a sense of satisfaction. It turns out that there are still so many improvements to the method that I thought was wonderful in the past. Sure enough, there is no truth without practice. Luo Fan let out a long sigh. He raised his right hand and clenched it. A detailed world the size of a fist was formed in his palm. This world was extremely small. There was only a piece of land with a radius of tens of millions of square kilometers. There were only some extremely ordinary creatures that did not even have complete spiritual consciousness and could not think. As for the yuan qi that filled it, it was so thin that it was almost non-existent. It was completely unsuitable for cultivators to cultivate. Even the strength of the space in this world was unimaginably fragile. As long as one had a core formation, they could easily shatter the void. It could be said that although this small world was full of vitality, it was far from being comparable to a mini kiliocosm. However, this was already a real and quite complete world after all. To be able to casually create this world meant that Luo Fan's ability and consciousness had reached an unbelievable level. He was almost omnipotent. Luo Fan looked at this world. There was some disappointment in his eyes, but there was more satisfaction. He was naturally disappointed that this world was so small and weak. It was even thousands of times weaker than a mini kiliocosm. However, He was satisfied because this ability to casually create a world was something that he did not possess before. It was only formed after he had gone through a new round of refinement of his cultivation realm. It represented that his control over the power of his ability had reached a whole new level. With a pinch, the world in his palm was crushed into pieces and disappeared without a trace. This world was created by Luo Fan out of thin air, but it had no source. If it wanted to exist for a long time, it needed a treasure to suppress it or Luo Fan's power to suppress it. Why would Luo Fan be willing to waste a treasure or have his FA restrained in a world that did not have any redeeming qualities? Naturally, he would destroy it with a wave of his hand. After destroying that world, Luo Fan looked down. The three layers of the system formed by the major kiliocosm, medium kiliocosm, and mini kiliocosm had completely stabilized. These tens of millions of worlds were like stars, emitting all sorts of mysterious lights. They constantly revolved in the air according to mysterious trajectories. Faint gray smoke was constantly being sucked in by these tens of millions of worlds. Every time it was sucked in, the smoke would grow slightly stronger. Every time it was sucked in, the smoke would become a little denser, and every time it was sucked in, the light of those worlds would become a little brighter. Clearly, the sucking in and spitting out smoke had considerable benefits for both the worlds and the smoke. The clouds of smoke were none other than the primal chaos godly lightning. After 100 years of swallowing and spitting, the chaotic divine lightning had undergone a considerable change compared to 100 years ago. Back then, there were only a few streaks of chaotic divine lightning that were swallowed and spat out by the world, but now there are endless clouds of smoke. Although it was still a world of difference compared to the boundless chaotic God's lightning, it was still in its embryonic form. The changes were astonishing. Hovering above the tens of millions of worlds, Luo Fan smiled and took a step forward, directly entering the great kiliocosm at the center of the group of worlds. From the outside, the great kiliocosm looked like a perfect sphere. But when he stepped into it, he discovered that the entire world had a round sky and a square earth, and it wasn't like a planet from the outside. The entire world was vast and boundless, and it was filled with Xiantian Yuan Qi that was so dense that it had almost condensed into substance. Among the Xiantian Yuan Qi, there were strands of chaotic Yuan Qi. The main body of the world was a boundless ocean. In this ocean, there were 3,000 continents. Each of these continents was trillions of miles in circumference. At this moment, the 3,000 continents were undergoing all sorts of incredible changes. It was as if there were huge invisible hands constantly pinching the 30 continents, and the terrain of the continents was undergoing all sorts of incredible changes that were beyond the imagination of all living beings. Mountains rose steeply from the ground, valleys formed out of thin air, lakes appeared out of nowhere, and rivers washed across the land from nothing. Among the 3,000 continents, there was a continent that was close to the center of the great kiliocosm that was particularly different from the other continents. This continent wasn't the largest among the 3,000 continents. However, the terrain on it was changing at the fastest speed among the 3,000 continents. Moreover, its structure was the most complicated among the 3,000 continents. In fact, the amount of Xiantian Yuan Qi and Hun Chaos Yuan Qi on it far surpassed that of the other 2,999 continents. It was as if this continent was the core of the entire great kiliocosm. This situation naturally attracted Luo Fan's attention. With a slight thought, his figure had already traversed the boundless void, directly appearing in the sky above this continent. He lowered his head and looked down at the continent. He felt a mysterious power seeping out from nothingness, affecting the continent and causing the terrain of the continent to change in an unimaginable way. With a slight sense, Luo Fan suddenly understood the root cause of these changes in the 3,000 continents of the great kiliocosm. These 3,000 continents corresponded to the 3,000 medium-sized worlds outside the great kiliocosm. Each continent corresponded to a medium-sized world. And it was precisely because of this correspondence that these continents were faintly connected to a certain medium-sized world outside. As a result, these continents were constantly subjected to the impact of those medium-sized worlds, and thus gradually changed, transforming in a way that matched those medium-sized worlds. Of course, this transformation didn't mean that the topography of these continents was completely the same as that of the medium-sized worlds. In fact, although these continents were only continents within the Great Kiliacosm, because the Great Kiliacosm was a supreme existence that was countless times more advanced than a medium-sized world, it could accommodate 3,000 different rule systems. Therefore, the rule systems and nomological systems of the 3,000 continents were relatively independent. The changes in the topography of the 3,000 continents were caused by the influence of the 3,000 rule systems and nomological systems from the medium-sized worlds. The changes in the topography were the manifestation of the rule systems and nomological systems changing. The changes were related to the 3,000 medium-sized worlds, but it wasn't a complete copy of the topography of the 3,000 medium-sized worlds. And at this time, the continent beneath Luo Fan's feet corresponded to the dimensional world that originally existed within the limitless palace. It was precisely because of this that it could change so quickly and its structure was so complicated. After all, because the dimensional world had existed for an extremely long time, it had already become incomparably powerful and stable. Naturally, its ability to influence this continent was also extremely strong. As for the other 2,000 continents, because the dimensional worlds they corresponded to were newly established, they hadn't even completely stabilized. Naturally, the influence they had on the corresponding continents was not as great as that of the complete dimensional world. I didn't expect such a change to occur. It seems that although these worlds were created by me, there are still countless mysteries within them that I can comprehend. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh inwardly when he understood this. After the great Tao of the primordial world had stripped away all the benefits he had obtained from the primordial world, Luo Fan's connection with the primordial world had almost disappeared. In this kind of situation, if he wanted to comprehend the primordial world to break through his cultivation realm, it would be millions of times more difficult than before. However, in this way, there was another benefit as well. That was that he had lost the guidance and pressure of the great Tao of the primordial world. He could already comprehend himself and his own creation to increase his cultivation realm. Although the major 1,000 worlds, medium 1,000 worlds, and minor 1,000 worlds in the limitless palace were created by him, they were still all-encompassing. Naturally, they could allow him to comprehend and continuously increase his cultivation realm. In comparison, it was much better than comprehending the primordial world. In fact, this was also natural. After all, if he didn't do this, his self-sufficiency, his lack of external help, and his self-sufficiency would just be empty words. Chapter 673. The most basic premise of being self-sufficient, not seeking external help, and being self-sufficient was to be able to rely on one's own existence to continuously improve. One would not be shackled by the external environment, nor would one be shackled by the external forces' inclination or rejection towards one's self. If one could not achieve this, then the so-called being self-sufficient, not seeking external help, and being self-sufficient would only be self-deceiving. Text first. The three qualities that Luo Fan possessed were naturally not self-deceiving. To be able to comprehend the way forward from the things he created, and to comprehend the mysteries that he did not know, was of course incomparably natural. Unfortunately, this kind of convenience is only effective when opening a world for the first time. Otherwise, after opening thousands of worlds, wouldn't one's cultivation realm advance by leaps and bounds, directly reaching Han Yuan? Luo Fan sighed. This was natural. Even though the worlds he created contained many grand Tao profundities that he himself didn't grasp, under the circumstances that he created these worlds under the same cultivation realm, no matter how many times he created them, the grand Tao profundities they contained wouldn't be any different. Under such circumstances, to Luo Fan, there was no difference at all between creating a world once and creating a world a billion times. Even in the process of creating the world, there wouldn't be much of a difference. What should be comprehended would be comprehended the first time. As for what shouldn't be comprehended, even if it was repeated billions of times, it still wouldn't be comprehended. Therefore, Luo Fan had this kind of feeling. After lamenting, Luo Fan's thoughts shifted. He had already revealed the vast thousand worlds and directly included every world in the entire cluster of worlds into his own perception. If it was in the outside world, no matter how powerful Luo Fan's divine ability was, he would definitely not be able to instantly include nearly 1,000,000 worlds into his perception. However, he was currently in the Wuji Palace of the Void, inside an artifact that he had forged. And these nearly 1,000,000 worlds were all created by him. He himself was the supreme creator of these worlds. In these worlds, he was almost omnipotent. Under such circumstances, he could do things that he would definitely not be able to do in the outside world with incomparable ease. It was even to the extent that the entire process was similar to how he perceived his own body with his mind. It was practically instinctive, and it didn't consume even the slightest bit of his strength. Nearly 10 million worlds were brought into his perception. Suddenly, an endless stream of information flowed through Luo Fan's mind like the Milky Way. The amount of information was so great that it was enough to burst the mind and consciousness of a person who had attained the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit and reached the peak of the Zenith Heaven Tao dispelling realm. However, because of Luo Fan's unique personality, the pressure that this information placed on Luo Fan was reduced by billions of times. Logically speaking, it should have been enough to collapse his mind and make his soul explode from the information that was pouring into his mind endlessly. However, it only made his mind stagnate for a moment, as if something was slightly bloated. In fact, after a few blinks of the eye, this slight discomfort completely disappeared as if it had never appeared. At this time, Luo Fan had already completely grasped the truth of these nearly 10 million worlds. In just a few blinks of the eye, his understanding of these worlds had reached a point where it could not be improved any further. Even if a cultivator who was also at the peak of the Zenith Heaven Tao dispelling realm came here and spent billions of years to understand any of these worlds, even if it was a minor kiliocosm, his understanding would not be comparable to what he had gained in just a few blinks of the eye. I see. It seems that this group of worlds is more complete than I expected. There are even specific restrictions on the level of cultivators that each world can accommodate. A rather joyful expression appeared on Luo Fan's face, and such thoughts flashed through his mind. Through the few blinks of an eye just now, he had a clear understanding of the truth of these nearly 10 million worlds. Naturally, he also understood the vitality, rule system, and the various restrictions of the nomological system of each world. Therefore, he understood the level of cultivators that each world could allow to exist. Among these nearly 10 million worlds, there was only one major kiliocosm, and there were slightly more major kiliocosms, with a total of 3,000. The number of minor kiliocosms had reached an astonishing level of 9 million. Among these worlds, the stability of the time and space of the 9 million minor kiliocosms, the density of the yuan qi, the perfection of the rule system, and the nomological system of the 9 million minor kiliocosms made it so that only cultivators could exist in these minor kiliocosms. In other words, among these 9 million minor kiliocosms, the most powerful cultivators with the highest level of cultivation could never reach the realm of loose immortals. Once a cultivator's cultivation got closer and closer to the realm of loose immortals, these minor kiliocosms would naturally send down more and more powerful tribulations to test these cultivators. In the end, if this cultivator could still make progress in this tribulation and finally break through the mortal world and become a bodiless immortal, then he would naturally be excluded from the minor kiliocosm and ascend to the medium kiliocosm corresponding to the minor kiliocosm. Therefore, It could be said that each minor kiliocosm was the immortal realm of the corresponding 3,000 minor kiliocosms. The environment of these minor kiliocosms, the density of yuan qi, the perfection of the rule system, and the nomological system were far better than those of the minor kiliocosms by 1,000 times. This kind of strength made the tolerance of each minor kiliocosm far stronger than that of the cultivators in the minor kiliocosms. Therefore, they could allow cultivators who had attained immortality to exist in them. It was also because of this special feature that the cultivators in the minor kiliocosms who reached the realm of loose immortals could naturally ascend to these worlds. However, that was all. After all, this minor kiliocosm was only a minor kiliocosm. Although its various characteristics were thousands of times stronger than those of the minor kiliocosms, it was only thousands of times stronger. The tolerance of its cultivators could only be limited to the realm corresponding to the earthly immortals' Tao fruit. In other words, this minor kiliocosm could only allow cultivators in the realm of loose immortals, realm of true immortals, and realm of golden immortals to exist in it. Once a cultivator reached the peak of the realm of golden immortals and wanted to continue to break through, these minor kiliocosms would naturally send down all kinds of tribulations to punish and test these cultivators. If a cultivator had great perseverance and divine power, he could withstand these tribulations and finally break through the realm of golden immortals and become primordial immortals. Naturally, he would be excluded from the minor kiliocosm and directly ascend to the only minor kiliocosm in the Void Wuji Palace. It could also be said that the minor kiliocosm was the immortal world of all the minor kiliocosms. Or it could be said that it was the immortal world of the minor kiliocosm. The richness of the primordial qi in the minor kiliocosm and the perfection of the nomological system were tens of thousands of times stronger than that of the minor kiliocosm. Under such circumstances, the tolerance of the cultivators in the minor kiliocosm was naturally tens of thousands of times stronger than that of the minor kiliocosm. Therefore, the cultivation of the cultivators allowed to exist in the minor kiliocosm should be able to reach the realm of zenith heaven, or even the peak of the realm of golden immortals. However, the minor kiliocosm was created by Luo Fan, and to some extent, it was one with Luo Fan. Therefore, the cultivation of the cultivators allowed to exist in the minor kiliocosm could only be limited to below that of Luo Fan. In other words, in the minor kiliocosm, the highest cultivators allowed to exist at this time could only be disbanded immortals of the great all-embracing heaven. In the future, when Luo Fan's cultivation continued to improve and break through, his tolerance would also continue to increase. Finally, when Luo Fan reached the peak of the realm of golden immortals of the great kiliocosm, the cultivators allowed to exist in the minor kiliocosm could reach the limit of the minor kiliocosm. As for what would happen after reaching the peak of the realm of golden immortals of the great all-embracing heaven, it was not something that Luo Fan could understand at this time, nor was it something that the Void Wuji Palace could restrict. But there was no need to explain. Mortals in the minor kiliocosm, individual immortals, genuine immortals, and golden immortals in the minor kiliocosm, Tai disbanded immortals, Tai genuine immortals, Tai golden immortals, and disbanded immortals of the great all-embracing heaven are in the minor kiliocosm. This arrangement is indeed very beneficial for the stability of the minor kiliocosm. Luo Fan thought of this and shouted, "Where's the boy?" Following his shout, a silhouette materialized from illusion and gradually condensed into a true form in front of Luo Fan. It was the Limitless Boy. At this time, the Limitless Boy looked like he was 7 or 8 years old. Compared to before, he had grown a little, but he still looked like a child. After the Limitless Boy appeared, he bowed and said, "The Limitless Boy is here to listen to the Master's instructions." Luo Fan had absolute control over everything in the Void Wuji Palace. The change of the Limitless Boy was naturally not beyond his perception. Therefore, he was not surprised by the huge change of the Limitless Boy, nor did he pay any more attention to it. He just said lightly, There will be divine tribulations in the 9 million minor kiliocosm and the 3,000 medium kiliocosm. They can't be allowed to happen at will. They must be controlled by someone. From now on, you will control the divine tribulations according to this method. Try to cultivate qualified practitioners and don't let the cultivation civilization decline. As he said this, he casually pointed, and a little spiritual light rushed out of his finger and directly integrated into the body of the limitless boy. Countless words and patterns flashed in the eyes of the limitless boy. These words and patterns flashed at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, they had disappeared without a trace, so that his eyes regained clarity. After his eyes regained clarity, the limitless boy bowed and said, "I will obey your orders." As he said this, his body shook and turned into nothingness. As he turned into nothingness, the group of worlds shook slightly. It was as if some mysterious law had undergone a strange change. Seeing the limitless boy disappear, Luo Fan thought to himself, "Right now, the number of intelligent beings in the group of worlds is far too few. If the laws operate naturally, the power of the divine tribulations will definitely be extremely strong. The number of beings that can meet the requirements of ascension will definitely be extremely few. If that's the case, who knows when the group of worlds will become prosperous? I can only use the limitless boy to reduce the power of the divine tribulations. But this isn't a long-term plan. In the future, when the group of worlds becomes prosperous, the power of the divine tribulations won't need to be reduced anymore." As he pondered, an inexplicable feeling suddenly appeared in his heart. Luo Fan looked up and saw that in the 3,000 minor kiliocosms that had existed since the beginning, someone had achieved a rare breakthrough and triggered the divine tribulations that had just been confirmed. There's actually such a thing. That world's endurance was originally quite weak. If one reached the return to spirit realm, they would uncontrollably ascend to a medium kiliocosm. That person could actually reach the crossing disaster realm under those conditions. Luo Fan thought to himself. He was interested in that existence. With a thought, he took a step forward and passed through the barriers of the many worlds, arriving in a minor kiliocosm where the first divine tribulations had occurred. This minor kiliocosm wasn't a world with a round sky and square earth. Instead, it was a minor kiliocosm formed by dozens of stars and hundreds of planets. The development of this world was close to a scientific and martial civilization. The technology in the entire minor kiliocosm was extremely advanced. Countless force field tracks were built in the void of the universe, and there were countless spaceships shuttling back and forth in these tracks at all times. The cultivation system of this world was the one that Luo Fan had read on Earth in his previous life. It was the scientific and martial cultivation system that had been described in novels. The scientific and martial cultivation system was a cultivation system that used all kinds of unimaginable technology to improve one's body, allowing one to possess unimaginable power and ultimately achieve the improvement of one's life essence. It was almost the opposite of the traditional ancient martial arts cultivation system of other worlds. The ancient martial arts cultivation system was a cultivation system that completely relied on one's own ability, completely isolated from the use of technology, and completely separated from all external help to cultivate supreme power and achieve the improvement of one's life essence. Although the two cultivation systems had different routes, they reached the same goal by different means. In the end, one could also achieve longevity and transcendence. Although they were martial arts cultivation systems, there was no difference in quality between them and other cultivation systems like the Primordial Spirit Great Path or the Golden Core Great Path. If one had a perfect cultivation method, one could ultimately transcend the world and even obtain Hun Yuan. At this time, Luo Fan was standing in the void of the spirit kiliocosm. Looking up, he pierced through the layers of barriers and saw a cultivator who was attracting the heavenly tribulation on a star in the center of the minor kiliocosm. It was a burly man. The burly man was more than 2 meters tall and wore a short robe. His body was surrounded by a faintly discernible magnetic light. He stood on the surface of the star. Below him, around his body, were endless flames that could melt gold and iron. There was a huge difference between the stars in this spirit kiliacosm and the stars in the untainted world outside, and even the stars in the Earth universe. The temperature of the flames was far lower than that of the true fire of the sun, and also lower than that of the stars in the Earth universe. However, this was a star after all. It was a star that had provided light and heat to the boundless void of the spirit kiliacosm and illuminated the entire spirit kiliacosm for billions of years. The temperature had reached an earth-shattering level, not to mention living creatures. Even existences that were millions of times harder than diamonds would directly melt under this temperature. However, at this moment, the 2-meter-tall, burly man stood in the flames without any protection, allowing the surrounding flames to burn him. Why is this happening? I cultivate the quantum heavenly concealment technique. All of my movements are restrained, allowing me to break through the limits of the world and improve infinitely. Why did I suddenly attract the heavenly tribulation today? The burly man frowned, such a thought flashing through his mind. This kind of thought might not be visible to other cultivators, but Luo Fan only needed a glance to see through his mind. The appearance of these thoughts was like a loud roar in Luo Fan's ears. How could it be hidden from him? The quantum heavenly concealment technique relies on quantum theory to integrate oneself with all matter in the world to avoid the repulsive force of the world. No wonder it can cultivate to this level under such circumstances. Luo Fan's eyes flashed. He instantly saw through everything about the burly man and understood why the burly man could attract the heavenly tribulation at this time. At this moment, a fiery red tribulation cloud condensed on the surface of the star. As soon as the tribulation cloud was formed, an unimaginable power spread out in all directions, causing the entire minor kiliacosm to tremble slightly. Any creature in the minor kiliacosm could feel that something shocking was happening at this moment. However, even though all living beings could sense this, only an extremely small number of powerful living beings could discover the source of these changes and discover this burly man. The heavenly tribulation? Since I can't avoid it, I'll break you. The burly man stood in the boundless flames and raised his eyebrows. His eyes revealed an astonishing will to fight, and this was the only thought in his mind. I didn't expect the father of quantum to still be alive and to have become so powerful. At this moment, one of the creatures that could see the burly man suddenly trembled and let out a cry of surprise. Following this cry of surprise, more and more creatures discovered the identity of the burly man and cried out in alarm. However, this was completely meaningless to Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan was already immersed in boundless joy. I see. I've achieved my Tao. This was the only thought in Luo Fan's mind. Just now, when he saw through the cultivation method that the burly man cultivated and knew what method the burly man used to hide from the minor thousand world, a flash of inspiration flashed across his mind. He instantly realized that the huge world group in the Void Wuji Palace was a huge benefit to him that he had never thought of before. The source of these benefits was not the world group itself, but the many living creatures that had appeared or were about to appear in the world group. In this boundless chaos, no two living creatures were exactly the same. It was naturally the same in the world group. As such, the more living creatures there were, the more thoughts there were. The same cultivation method would definitely have different effects in the hands of different living creatures. In other words, different living creatures' comprehension of the same cultivation method would definitely surpass other living creatures in some way. If these surpasses were gathered together, the benefits to a person would definitely be earth-shattering. Chapter 674. Countless thoughts flashed through every living being's mind at every moment. However, most of them only flashed by and disappeared without a trace before the living being could sense them. That was why it seemed like there were only a few distracting thoughts at every moment. Text first. Among these countless thoughts, there were countless distracting thoughts that had no redeeming qualities. However, there must be some subtle, indescribable thoughts that contain some sort of truth. If these thoughts that contain some sort of truth were grasped by the living being, it would be a living inspiration that would allow the living being to obtain extraordinary gains. If these thoughts were applied to cultivation, it would be enough for the living being to obtain mysteries that other living beings could not comprehend, and even mysteries that the original cultivation system did not possess. This was also the reason why the cultivation world would grow as it developed. If it weren't for this special characteristic, how could there be more and more cultivation methods and techniques in the cultivation world? Therefore, it could be said that when the number of cultivators in the Cosmos group increased to a certain level, the mysteries of the great Tao contained in the entire Cosmos group could no longer be restricted by the principles that the living beings could comprehend. At the very least, it could not be completely restricted. As long as it could not be completely restricted to the creator of the Cosmos group and a master of the entire Wuji Palace, it was equivalent to having billions of living beings helping him comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao within the Cosmos group at all times. Under such circumstances, even if the Cosmos group did not change, Luo Fan could rely on the existence of these living beings to continuously comprehend many new things. In the end, after countless years of accumulation, there would be a moment when his cultivation realm would increase, and he would finally push his cultivation realm to the peak, or even break through the peak. The only things that prevented him from achieving this goal were time and the number of living beings. However, these 2 points were definitely not a problem for Luo Fan. Time. Every time Luo Fan cultivated in seclusion, trillions of years would pass. What was time to him? As for the living creatures, there were already over 100 billion living creatures in a small kiliocosm. When nearly 10 million worlds were filled with living creatures in the future, what kind of number of living creatures would there be? Therefore, it could be said that as long as there were endless living beings and the existence of this group of worlds, Luo Fan would be able to completely leave the primordial world at this moment. He would no longer look at the primordial world and no longer comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao through the primordial world. He could continue to advance and improve. However, he had already completely escaped from all the restrictions of the primordial world and was no longer shackled by it. With these qualities, he was only a thin line away from true transcendence. This line was clearly his cultivation realm. It was precisely because his cultivation realm was still not high enough to allow the primordial world to be destroyed while he still existed. That was why he could not truly transcend. Obviously, even this trace could be eliminated through the accumulation of time. So, how could there still be any obstructions when compared to truly attaining transcendence and attaining the Tao? Because of this, Luo Fan was inexplicably surprised. He immediately said, "My Tao is complete." After a long time, his mind gradually calmed down. He no longer had the mood to waste any more time in the small kiliocosm. He took a step and left the small kiliocosm. He left the group of worlds formed by nearly 10 million worlds and arrived in the strange void above the sea of lightning. With a slight thought, countless mysterious threads spread out from the group of worlds in an instant. They vaguely connected to his mind, causing him to feel that his mind had vaguely expanded. Even the limit of numbers could not describe the specific multiplication. In an instant, a boundless world of mind and will that was billions of times vaster than the entire primordial world was formed. The entire world was divided into billions of parts. Each part was independent from any of the surrounding wills. However, they faintly affected each other and interacted with each other. In this boundless mind and will, there were thoughts that could drown the primordial world at every moment. Most of these thoughts were only intermittent, distracting thoughts. Most of them could only cause the spirit of living beings to be distracted, but they were not beneficial to living beings at all. However, every world of mind had bits and pieces of comprehension about the truth and all kinds of indescribable creative views. Although there was only a trace of this kind of truth perception and this kind of creative point of view in every part of his mind and world, the entire mind and world that was hundreds of millions of times vaster than the great desolate world merged together. This kind of truth perception and this kind of indescribable creative point of view was enough to turn into a monstrous torrent. Although it could not drown Luo Fan, it still occupied a corner of his mind and will. It was no longer insignificant. This entire world of mind and will that was billions of times vaster than the primordial world was nothing else. It was the gathering of all the living beings in a major kiliacosm, 3,000 medium kiliacosm, and 9 million small kiliacosms, regardless of whether they had a complete spiritual consciousness or not, and whether they had enough intelligence or not. This gathering method was naturally not something that Luo Fan could completely contain with his own mind and will. Even if his cultivation realm increased by 10,000 times, 100,000 times, or 1,000,000 times, he would not be able to do this. This gathering method was, in fact, using the supreme power of the limitless Void Palace, his special status as the creator of the group of worlds, the power of the limitless Void Palace, the rules and systems of laws of the major kiliacosm, medium kiliacosm, and small kiliacosm. He used his own mind and will as a channel to make the minds and wills of the countless living beings fuse into one place from an extremely high angle. This gathering method allowed Luo Fan to use a special method to select and copy the countless thoughts that were produced in the minds and wills of all the living beings in the group of worlds at every moment. Thus, he could browse and comprehend them at will. As for the thoughts that were extracted, there were naturally the countless thoughts that were produced in the minds and wills of the living beings in the group of worlds at every moment. These thoughts were naturally the thoughts that were related to all kinds of truths and special creations. These thoughts were just discontinuous thoughts. Naturally, they were intermittent and did not form a system. It was naturally impossible to directly transform them into mysteries. However, they contained countless seeds that were contained in the group of worlds. The mysteries of the great Tao of heaven and earth that were not contained in the group of worlds. They contained the truth of the essence of life. These were equivalent to countless inspirations in Luo Fan's mind. He could choose and comprehend them at will. Although these inspirations belonged to others, and most of them were merely a kind of verification of his past cultivation, there were still some that he had not thought of and were of great help to him. As long as there was one in a billion inspirations that was beneficial to him, it would be an earth-shattering harvest for Luo Fan. In the long run, it would definitely allow him to make unimaginable progress and have an infinitely bright future. And obviously, it was not difficult to find one of these inspirations that was beneficial to him among the billions of inspirations. Luo Fan's eyes seemed to be opened and closed at the same time. Specks of light constantly shone in his pupils. These specks of light were generally quite dim, almost impossible to see clearly. They were far less than 1,000,000th of the spiritual light that Luo Fan's eyes had produced in the past. However, each speck of light had its own uniqueness. Every speck of light was different from the others, appearing boundlessly profound. These specks of light were none other than the specks of inspiration that he had obtained from the minds of other living beings. The reason why they were so dim was because the cultivation of these living beings was extremely low compared to Luo Fan. All the truths that their inspirations came into contact with were only existences of an extremely low level. They could not compare to the inspirations that Luo Fan had when he comprehended the mysteries of the great Tao. Luo Fan floated there. Specks of light constantly flickered in his eyes. Occasionally, a speck of light would grow wildly and directly suppress the other specks of light. Although it could not compare to the inspirations that he had when he comprehended the mysteries of the great Tao, it was not far off. Clearly, Luo Fan felt that a certain inspiration was useful. He poured his energy into it and began to nurture that bit of inspiration, allowing that seed to grow and strengthen. In the end, it was raised to a realm that matched his current cultivation. The reason why it still could not compare to the light that he had comprehended in his heart was naturally because these inspirations came from other living beings and not from his heart. After all, they were not very compatible with him. Naturally, the light was slightly dimmer. After a long time, Luo Fan's eyes blinked slightly, and all the light faded. He often let out a sigh of relief, and a faint smile appeared on his face. This is still not the best time. Among the nearly 10 million worlds, only the 3,000 minor kiliocosm and 1 medium kiliocosm have cultivators. There are far too few intelligent living beings with complete spiritual consciousness. If I start to comprehend like this, the gains will be too little and too slow. It's a waste of time. It's better to use this time to increase the number of living beings. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. With a thought, his body shook. The Jifeng seal and the Xuanji robe appeared out of thin air. Then, with a turn, they each turned into a man and a woman. Both of them looked young. They were the treasure spirits of the two magic treasures, Jifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy. Greetings, Master. After Jifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy appeared, they did not dare to be negligent. They directly bowed and paid their respects. Ever since these two magic treasures were refined by Luo Fan, they had been upgraded several times and were already primordial unity treasures. However, because Luo Fan was focused on cultivation and had the existence of the Wuji Void Palace, he rarely used them. They had been sleeping in a world of his sea of consciousness. At this moment, it had been trillions of years since they last appeared. If it were not for the fact that these two magic treasures did not have self-consciousness, their spiritual consciousness would have collapsed after such a long time, and they would have become magic treasures again. However, even so, the trillions of years of accumulation had caused the treasure spirits of these two magic treasures to have slight changes. Naturally, the temperament they displayed was also greatly different from before. At least, Xuanji Boy did not dare to be impolite to Luo Fan like before. Luo Fan looked at these two magic treasures and sighed faintly. After these two magic treasures were refined, they had rarely been used. Recently, they had almost been completely forgotten by him. In fact, he felt a little sorry for these two magic treasures. At this moment, he looked at the two magic treasures again. They were still respectful to him, and he felt a little guilty. His expression was calm, and he said without any hesitation, "Get up. You two have been silent for a long time, and it's not good to continue being silent. I have a task for you. You must be serious and cautious. If you do it well, it will be of great benefit to you. You might even break the shackles and advance further." "Yes, Master." Xuanji Boy and Jifeng Boy's eyes lit up. Although they did not have self-awareness, they still had rationality, emotions, and all sorts of things that normal living beings possessed. Therefore, they could also analyze the pros and cons. They would react accordingly to things that were beneficial to them, so it was normal for their eyes to brighten slightly. Luo Fan casually pointed, and a strange light entered the bodies of Jifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy, causing their bodies to tremble slightly. Then, they suddenly emitted two mysterious rays of light. The light expanded and contracted, swallowed, and spat out. It was like a heartbeat, but also like it was breathing. Faintly, it formed a mysterious fusion with the entire Void Wuji Palace, as if it could trigger some kind of inexplicable power in the Void Wuji Palace. Obviously, Luo Fan had given them the ability to borrow the power of the Void Wuji Palace. These two magic treasures had always been in Luo Fan's sea of consciousness. When Luo Fan transformed the entire sea of consciousness, their essence had naturally changed. They became similar to the Void Wuji Palace and formed a certain degree of fusion with Luo Fan, completely cutting off all kinds of connections with the primordial world. Therefore, these two magic treasures naturally had a close connection with the Void Wuji Palace. That was why they could be given the power of the Void Wuji Palace so easily. Without this quality, even if Luo Fan gave these two magic treasures the authority to do so, these two magic treasures would not be able to withstand the impact of the power. Perhaps they would be smashed into pieces and turned into nothingness in the blink of an eye. One must know that the everlasting Void Palace was a great, overarching heaven treasure. Within it, there were close to 10 million worlds. One could imagine how terrifying its power was. At this moment, the situation was naturally different. When the light appeared, Jifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy shook slightly and turned back into a seal and a square piece of green cloth. Under the impact of the power, they directly turned into their original forms. Then, the seal shone brightly and gradually underwent some kind of inexplicable change. Its edges became slightly blurry, and then it shook and turned into 9 million square seals. They turned into streams of light and rushed into every minor kiliocosm and medium-class world in the group of worlds below. At the same time, the Xuanji robe shook and turned into 9 million square green cloths. They also scattered and rushed into every minor kiliocosm and medium-class world in the group of worlds below. After these seals and cloths entered those worlds, they transformed into a man and a woman, both of which hovered in the air above those worlds. In the group of worlds, every minor kiliocosm was different from the others. Some minor kiliocosm had a round sky and a square earth, similar to the structure of the primordial world. Some worlds were like the structure of the universe on Earth, which was also like the minor kiliocosm that Luo Fan had entered before, which was made up of planets. Even if it was a minor kiliocosm with a round sky and square Earth, every single one of them was different. Some were a sea of fire, some were an ocean, and some were endless blades and ice crystals. Almost every kind of terrain existed. The minor kiliocosm that was made up of planets were naturally even more strange. Some had thousands of stars, some were single stars, some were boundless, and some were only tens of millions of miles of void. There were all kinds of unimaginable types. The minor kiliocosm was so strange, but the medium-class world did not have so many types. All the medium-class worlds were round sky and square earth. Moreover, the composition of these medium-class worlds was rather balanced. They did not have the strange and extreme structure of the minor kiliocosm. They only showed a slight inclination. For example, some medium-class worlds had more gold elements. In these medium-class worlds, cultivators who were inclined towards gold had a greater advantage and could obtain faster and greater improvement. Some, on the other hand, had more wind elements or water elements or earth elements. However, in general, these medium-class worlds were somewhat similar to the primordial world in nature. They were extremely tolerant. The boundless world, which had been mentioned before, was also round sky and square earth, and was divided into 3,000 continents. Each continent corresponded to a medium-class world. In other words, each continent had a slight inclination. When combined, their tolerance was almost the same as that of the primordial world. The 9 million seal and square green cloth were none other than the clones of the ultimate square seal and the star pearl robe, which were created by the power of the entire Void Wuji Palace. After these clones entered the minor kiliocosm and medium-class world, the positions they appeared in were different according to the different forms of these worlds. But no matter how different they were, the positions they appeared in were extremely subtle for these worlds. These positions were almost all in a certain part of these worlds where the vitality was the most exuberant and the fastest to produce vitality. Chapter 675. A complete world, be it a major kiliocosm, a medium kiliocosm, or a minor kiliocosm, would always be filled with vitality. Text first published, otherwise it would be impossible for living beings to be born in this world, and it would naturally not be called a complete world. Since vitality was born, it would naturally have its most fundamental source, which was the source of all vitality. That was the so-called source of vitality of the world. Of course, the source of vitality of the world did not mean that it was irreplaceable. It also did not mean that the world would become incomplete if the source of vitality was destroyed, and it would be impossible for living beings to be born again. In fact, the importance of the source of vitality was rather ordinary. If the source of vitality was destroyed, the complete world would naturally adjust and form the source of vitality in another place. The endless vitality of the entire world would not be cut off. Therefore, before the source of vitality was destroyed, the source of vitality was the most important place in the entire complete world. The men and women who entered over 9 million worlds were, in fact, the clones of Jifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy. The power of having close to 10 million clones was naturally something that could be done with a thought for existences like Luo Fan. However, it was almost impossible for existences who had yet to become Zenith Heaven Realm. The reason why Jifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy were able to do this was because they had borrowed the power of the Infinite Void Palace. The Void Wuji Palace was already a Zenith Heaven treasure, which was equivalent to becoming a Zenith Heaven Realm expert. It naturally possessed the power of having 10 million clones. It was naturally a relatively easy thing to give two magic treasures in one's body. Because of this, Jifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy could possess such an incredible divine ability in advance. Each of these clones had the same intelligence as the original body and had a close connection with the original body, but they were quite independent. This strange characteristic allowed these clones to think on their own and make all sorts of decisions on their own. However, they would never betray the main body or take control of the main body. It was a rather rare divine ability. After these clones stepped into the source of vitality of each world, they would turn slightly and combine their divine powers with the various characteristics of the world they were in, absorbing the infinite matter around them and directly building different, but all containing infinite mysteries at that location. Any living being that saw these buildings would be able to understand the various mysteries related to the world. Thus, the difficulty for these creatures to embark on the path of cultivation would be greatly reduced. These buildings were divided into two parts, one yin and one yang, one bright and one dark, one hidden and one visible. They were combined together according to some sort of extremely profound method, and they displayed the supreme principles of yin and yang in the world and described the profundities of the grand Tao of the universe. These buildings were essentially the same, but because they were fused with the laws of the various worlds, they were all different. Some were even completely opposite, and there was no similarity at all. But even so, because they were essentially the same, these buildings all had a common name, Taoist Palace. This common name, no matter which world or which building it was in, was the same language, the same font, but it contained even more profound and mysterious principles and mysteries than the buildings themselves. When the Taoist Palace was formed, the Jifeng Boy and the Xuanji Boy's clones entered the buildings, each guarding the two parts of the building. As the two of them stood guard, the buildings trembled, faintly becoming one with these worlds. They could draw upon the power of the entire world, forming an indescribable connection between every inch of the world and the Taoist Palace. Or it could be said that the entire world had formed a strange connection with the Taoist Palace that guarded the source of vitality through the gathering and scattering of vitality. This connection allowed the Taoist Palace to keenly discover where the vitality of the world gathered and discover where the living beings born from the vitality were, what characteristics they had, and whether they had the potential to be cultivated. Luo Fan had sent the Jifeng Boy and the Xuanji Boy's clones into these worlds in order to increase the number of living beings, so that the living beings in these worlds could reproduce and grow at the fastest speed possible. In the end, he would be able to obtain more inspiration and obtain more possibilities for improvement. There were many ways to increase the number of living beings in these worlds and speed up their reproduction and growth. But in general, there were only two main methods. One of the most direct methods was naturally to migrate the living beings in the worlds that already had many living beings to the newly born worlds. The other method was more indirect and slightly slower, and that was to make the living beings in the newly born worlds grow stronger at the fastest speed possible. As long as these living beings were strong enough, their ability to survive would naturally become stronger. With a strong ability to survive, their ability to reproduce, their speed of reproduction, and their speed of growth would naturally increase as well. From there, they would achieve Luo Fan's goal. These two methods each had their advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of the first method was that it was fast. Moreover, it did not require too much effort. They only needed to move the existing living beings into the new worlds. The various rules and nomological systems of the newly born worlds were still not completely stabilized. If they wanted to comprehend the truth of the great Tao and become stronger, it would be many times easier than a complete world. As long as they were thrown into the new worlds would naturally make them stronger, and their numbers would continue to grow. However, this method also had a huge weakness. That was when the living beings in the existing worlds were moved into the new worlds, no matter what kind of living being was chosen. Even if it was a baby that was like a piece of white paper, it would definitely contain the brand of the original world. This kind of brand had many benefits for the living beings themselves. It could make them stronger in a more direct way. However, for the new worlds, there were many disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage was that the living space that was most suitable for the living beings of these worlds would be constantly compressed. This would make it difficult for these worlds to develop their own characteristics, and it would be difficult for them to truly display the rules and nomological systems that these worlds had that were different from other worlds. This was absolutely unacceptable for Luo Fan, who wanted to obtain inspiration from these worlds. Therefore, Luo Fan did not need to look at the specific methods of the second method. He directly rejected all the methods of the first method and decided to use the second method. The advantage of the second method was naturally that it could fully display the special characteristics of these worlds. It could develop a completely different species of living beings from other worlds. Of course, the disadvantages were also quite obvious. It was many times slower than the first method. For Luo Fan, who urgently needed to cultivate more creatures from these worlds, this was also a weakness that was neither too big nor too small. Given the advantages and disadvantages, Luo Fan could only choose the second method. At this moment, the clones of Jifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy were using the second method. The method they used was the Tao Palaces that were formed by the combination of their own abilities and the rules of each world. These Tao Palaces were extremely mysterious. After integrating the rules of these worlds, they were equivalent to the materialization of the Great Tao. In this case, as long as the light and shadow were seen by any living being in this world, it was equivalent to directly displaying the Great Tao in front of that living being. The living being did not need to spend much effort to easily comprehend the cultivation principles that were most suitable for themselves in that world. In fact, it was not inconceivable for them to directly comprehend the exquisite cultivation methods. Therefore, when this change occurred, the Tao Palaces were not very busy for most of the over 9 million worlds. They would only occasionally tremble slightly and project a projection to a certain position. It would be enough for them to shake slightly in front of a living being with slight potential. After all, these worlds were newly born. The entire world could even be said to be in a primordial state. Even if there was endless vitality, it was difficult for too many living beings to be born in such a short period of time. Therefore, it was naturally impossible for too many living beings with sufficient potential to be nurtured to appear. However, for the 3,000 lesser kiliocosms that originally existed, these Tao Palaces were trillions of times busier than the Tao Palaces of the other lesser kiliocosms. They had to release projections at almost every moment. Through the connection of the flow of vitality, they would be projected to a certain position in these worlds, and their figures would appear in front of certain living beings. And this was under the condition that the Tao Palaces of these worlds raised the conditions to trigger projections to tens of thousands of times that of the other worlds. If they used the same conditions as the other worlds to trigger projections, these Tao Palaces would probably constantly send out countless projections from them. The entire world would probably be filled with these projections. Luo Fan floated above the group of worlds and looked down at the constant changes that were happening to the entire group of worlds. He could see through the Tao Palaces that existed in each world. Knowing that everything was going according to his plan, he could not help but nod to himself. At this moment, the square seal and the Big Dipper robe were still in front of Luo Fan at this moment. However, it seemed as if all of his thoughts and spirit had left his body and had become like a dead object. He no longer had the intelligence he had before. This was only natural. They were only at the level of primordial unity mystic treasures, and the ability to create millions of doppelgangers was too profound for them. Although they could barely use it with the help of the infinite Void Palace, the pressure on their spiritual consciousness was unimaginably strong. At this moment, it was still a little difficult for them to put all their energy and spiritual consciousness into the divine ability. How could there be any left in their bodies? Luo Fan smiled and said, "You've followed me for so many years, so I'll give you this opportunity. If there comes a day when you can easily control these doppelgangers and gather the principles they've obtained from the various worlds, you'll be able to break through primordial unity and become a grand heavenly immortal without the need for me to refine them again." As he spoke, he pressed his hand down lightly. The square seal and the Big Dipper robe trembled slightly and melted into the void. They turned into a strange existence that seemed illusory and real. It was as if they had entered another space-time, and only faint light and shadow remained in this space-time. With a slight thought, the surrounding light and shadow circulated. In the blink of an eye, the sea of lightning that was still in a smoky state in the world cluster below shrunk at an unimaginable speed and turned into a disk with a diameter of 1,000 feet in the blink of an eye. Beneath Luo Fan's feet, other than where the disk was, a huge circular platform that was 100 times larger than the disk appeared out of thin air. This platform was not made of stone, nor was it anything that had ever appeared in reality. It was just a simple platform. Any living being that saw this platform would know that it was a platform. However, it was impossible for anyone to analyze the structure of this platform. In fact, this platform was indeed just a platform. It was Luo Fan's will that caused the limitless palace to naturally change, turning the platform, which was originally just a noun, into reality, allowing it to materialize. It could be said that this platform was the purest, most real, and most direct platform. As Luo Fan stood on this platform, the place where his feet landed seemed to be extremely soft and hard at the same time, appearing extremely mysterious. There was no material on the entire platform, but it seemed like any material could appear at will. He sat down cross-legged, and a meditation cushion formed under him, gently supporting him. This praying mat was just like the platform below. Anyone who saw this praying mat would know that it was a praying mat, something for people to sit on. However, if one wanted to analyze its specific composition and whether or not it was truly made from praying mat, no living being could do so. As he sat on this meditation cushion, he felt that there was no meditation cushion in the world that could make him feel more comfortable. This made Luo Fan very satisfied. Outside this platform was a boundless void, or rather a boundless void, a void that did not even have time or space. Under the reflection of the boundless void, the entire platform seemed to be the only existence in all space-time in the universe. If it was combined with the sea of lightning and the group of worlds in the circular disk below, this platform would be like a supreme, incredible place that transcended all space-time. Just standing there would naturally give one a strange feeling of transcendence. Perhaps I can already relax a little. Luo Fan let out a long sigh of relief. A thought suddenly flowed through his mind. According to the rules of the primordial world, if the major chiliocosm attaches itself to the primordial world, its time flow can be adjusted to 365 times that of the primordial world. If the medium chiliocosm attaches itself to the major chiliocosm, its time flow can be adjusted to 365 times that of the major chiliocosm. Similarly, the time flow of the minor chiliocosm can also be adjusted to 365 times that of the medium chiliocosm. In other words, the flow of time in the minor chiliocosm with the fastest flow of time can be accelerated to 48,627,125 times that of the primordial world. As for the existence of this platform that transcends the world group, the flow of time can also be adjusted to be the same as the minor chiliocosm with the fastest flow of time. In other words, it can also reach the level of more than 48, 6 million times that of the primordial world. After this thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan finally completely relaxed. His face revealed an expression as if he had everything under control. The time flow of this platform could be accelerated to more than 48,600 times that of the primordial world. In other words, to Luo Fan, a year in the primordial world was equivalent to 48 million years for him. 10 years in the primordial world was equivalent to more than 480 million years for him. 100 years was more than 4 billion years. 1,000 years was more than 40 billion years. And a yuan hui was 129,600 years. In other words, a yuan hui in the primordial world represented nearly 6 trillion years to Luo Fan. At this moment, it had only been a short 100 yuan hui since the creation of the primordial world. The entire primordial world was still in the early stages of the creation of the world. The next great tribulation was still far away. At least, it was not something that would happen in hundreds or thousands of yuan hui. In other words, even if the next great tribulation of heaven and earth was powerful enough to destroy Luo Fan did not have to worry anymore. Because to him, the next great tribulation of heaven and earth would be countless billions of years later. For Luo Fan, who only needed the accumulation of time to continuously increase his cultivation realm, if he still couldn't push his cultivation realm to the peak after such a long period of time and couldn't transcend, then he wouldn't be Luo Fan, but a single-celled organism. Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan not have the feeling that he was no longer under any pressure and could completely relax? At that moment, he only felt that he could relax a little. It was already a display of his mentality of being prepared for danger in times of peace. To Luo Fan, this feeling of being able to relax was something that he had not enjoyed for trillions of years. After coming to the primordial world, Luo Fan seemed to have been smooth sailing. He had directly grown from a Khanate god at the bottom of the primordial world to the zenith heaven Tao fruit and the peak of the zenith heaven Tao dispelling Tao. He seemed to be complacent and everything was perfect. However, only Luo Fan himself knew that after coming to the untainted world, the pressure on his soul had reached an enormous degree. As the saying goes, the ignorant are fearless. If this sentence were to be said in reverse, the more one knew, the more one would understand fear. Luo Fan had transmigrated from an Earth that had countless legends of the primordial world and the Earth's universe. Although he did not know why the primordial world and the Earth's legends of the primordial world had a miraculous connection, all his encounters had told him that the primordial world and the Earth's legends of the primordial world were in the same place. In the legends of the Earth, the primordial world was a place where those who did not become saints were ants. The cruelty of it was enough to make anyone who had heard of the legend feel despair. Under such circumstances, one could imagine how strong the pressure on Luo Fan's heart was when he came to the primordial world. How could he dare to relax? More. Address. More. Address. Chapter 676. Now that he knew that his path to the highest peak was clear, he could finally relax a little from the immense pressure that had been weighing down on his heart for countless years. Text first. Full text. No advertising as soon as he relaxed. Luo Fan felt an indescribable sense of peace rise from his heart. In this tranquility, his eyes gradually closed, and his breathing became incomparably calm. All of the activities of his mind completely stopped, and in the blink of an eye, he had already entered the deepest state of sleep. When he entered the state of sleep, everything in the infinite void palace entered an extremely calm and stable state. It was as if the rules and systems of laws in the infinite void palace had been completely fixed and could no longer change. This was a world of difference from his previous state, where he seemed to be constantly adjusting and evolving towards a more perfect state. Sleep, for Luo Fan, was a supreme enjoyment that he had not enjoyed for countless trillions of years. Luo Fan's entire body and mind had completely lost all perception of the outside world. He didn't need to produce any thoughts, and he didn't need to care about any changes in the outside world. This made Luo Fan's entire body and mind inexplicably happy. During this process, the zenith heaven Tao fruit, boundless Fa Li, sea of consciousness, and physical body in Luo Fan's body all underwent slight adjustments. This adjustment did not make any of them improve, but it made the connection between them become closer, and the relationship between them became more balanced. This made the great perfection will that Luo Fan constantly revealed after attaining the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit become even more intense and obvious. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of millions of years passed. In this deepest state of sleep, Luo Fan was like an ordinary person who had entered a state of sleep. His body was lying flat, and his chest rose and fell. Breath slowly flowed in and out of his mouth and nose, and faint snoring sounds came from his mouth and nose, echoing in the boundless void that only had one platform. This kind of snoring was so mysterious that it had an unparalleled infectious ability. Any living creature that heard this snoring, no matter how powerful it was, would unknowingly fall into a deep sleep along with this snoring sound. On this day, Luo Fan's mind was slightly shaken. His mind, which had been calm and tranquil for hundreds of millions of years, suddenly became turbulent. In an instant, he woke up from the deepest state of sleep. His mind, his body, the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit in his body, the boundless magic power, and the peaceful sea of consciousness all turned from extreme stillness to extreme activity in an instant. He instantly recovered to his peak state. He abruptly opened his eyes, slightly stretched his body, and sat up, exhaling a mouthful of turbid air that had accumulated for hundreds of millions of years. When he opened and closed his eyes, an indescribable sense of ease could be seen in his pupils. In the hundreds of millions of years of sleep, all the negative emotions, all the pressure, and all the uneasiness that he had accumulated in the trillions of years since he came to this untainted world had been completely calmed. At this moment, Luo Fan's mind was clear and untainted by the mortal world. His thoughts were clear, and his speed had reached the peak of his life. With a thought, all the changes in the entire Void Wuji Palace were completely absorbed by his senses. In the hundreds of millions of years, when Luo Fan had entered the deepest state of sleep, Zhifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy had almost no time to spare. They used all their power to nurture the living creatures in every minor kiliocosm and medium kiliocosm, trying their best to fulfill Luo Fan's orders before he fell asleep. After hundreds of millions of years of development, the current Void Wuji Palace had completely changed compared to hundreds of millions of years ago. The number of living creatures in the group of worlds had increased by tens of billions of years compared to hundreds of millions of years ago. The entire group of worlds was filled with spiritual light and endless vitality. Almost every world was filled with endless vitality. There was no advertisement. Although the rules and laws of each world were different, the number of living creatures in each world was not necessarily the same. Without exception, the number of living creatures in each minor kiliocosm had almost reached the limit of the number of living creatures each minor kiliocosm could bear. The medium kiliocosm was different from the minor kiliocosm. Hundreds of millions of years in the minor kiliocosm was only hundreds of thousands of years in the medium kiliocosm. Although countless living creatures could ascend from the minor kiliocosm to the medium kiliocosm, and the medium kiliocosm could also naturally produce countless living creatures, the time was relatively short, and the difficulty of ascending was quite high. Therefore, among the 3,000 medium kiliocosm, besides the medium kiliocosm that existed at the beginning, the number of living creatures in the other medium kiliocosm was quite small. This was determined by the nature of the world, and it was not something that Zhifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy could change. As for the great kiliocosm above it, there was no need to mention it. Even the medium kiliocosm that had lived for hundreds of thousands of years only had very few living creatures. The great kiliocosm had only lived for a few thousand years, so the number of living creatures born in this world was quite small and weak. This was natural. There were no living creatures that ascended from the medium kiliocosm at all. This caused the huge great kiliocosm to still be in the wilderness. Everything retained the scene when the great kiliocosm was first created, and there were very few traces of living creatures. With a slight thought from Luo Fan, the world formed by his mind and will, which was formed by all the living creatures in the group of worlds, was absorbed into his perception in a way that was trillions of times greater than the last time. Even back then, this world of mind and was already trillions of times larger than the entire great desolate world. Now that it was trillions of times wider than before, it could be imagined just how vast the world of mind and will was. Under such circumstances, even if Luo Fan only took an extremely small part of each small world of mind and will, the total amount of thoughts related to the various truths and creation that appeared at every moment had already reached an earth-shattering level. It practically covered the heavens and the earth. If it wasn't for Luo Fan's mind and will possessing an extremely shocking endurance, and if it was any other golden immortal that had attained the golden immortal realm, the golden immortal realm would have his mind and will burst apart from the inspiration that covered the heavens and the earth at this instant, causing irreparable and severe injuries. Even though Luo Fan had completely absorbed the endless inspiration, he still felt that it was a little strenuous. He felt that the attention that he could allocate to other things had been reduced to a considerable extent. Although it did not make his thoughts stop and he could not move, it had slightly affected his thinking. If I focus on cultivating in this state, it'll naturally be quite good. If I use it normally, it'll be a little hindrance, and it won't be beautiful, Luo Fan thought. With that thought in mind, his mind moved slightly, and thousands of thoughts were born in his mind. After these thoughts were born, they were not like other thoughts that were born and destroyed. Instead, they directly condensed and took form in his mind. They began to construct according to an indescribable method, forming a strange living being. The ratio of this living being's head to body was extremely different. Its head was extremely huge, but its body was extremely short. Its eyes flickered with endless wisdom. Its mouth had no teeth or tongue, and it was like a huge black hole. Its body was long and narrow. After it was connected to its head, it looked like an extremely huge tadpole. Such a living being had never appeared in this group of worlds. It had never appeared in the primordial world or even in the Earth universe. This living being was just a living being that Luo Fan had casually created in the world of his mind and will. The nature of this living being was extremely strange. This living being had no name and no past. It fed on inspirational thoughts and could absorb endless inspirational thoughts into its body through its mouth. It used the mysterious power produced by the collision of these inspirational thoughts to survive. Most importantly, during this process, the inspirational thoughts would not be lost in the slightest. Instead, they would be combined in an extremely exquisite way, combining the inspirations of the same nature into brand new inspirational thoughts through various exquisite combinations. These brand new inspirational thoughts were of the same origin as the inspirational thoughts that formed them. They were essentially the same. It could be said that they were the integration of all the previous inspirational thoughts. After the living being formed by thousands of thoughts appeared, its size expanded greatly. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a supreme existence that filled the world. It directly absorbed the endless inspirational thoughts that surged towards Luo Fan's mind. Like rivers entering the sea, the endless inspirational thoughts entered the living being's mouth and disappeared into its body. When this change occurred, Luo Fan only felt that his mind had become clear and the pressure caused by the endless inspiration had completely disappeared in an instant. His state of mind and thoughts had returned to their most perfect peak state once again. Obviously, the influence of the endless inspirational thoughts had been completely eliminated. Although the living being was created by Luo Fan and was illusory to the outside world, in the world of his mind and will, it was an existence that could not be more real. If Luo Fan was just an illusion and did not understand the most basic structure of this living being and did not understand the principle of this living being's talent, then even if this living being was real to the world of his mind and will, it would not have the corresponding power. At most, it would be an empty shell. However, it was clear that with Luo Fan's cultivation at the peak of the Luo scattered Tao, and his unimaginable comprehension of the scene of Jianfeng Zi splitting the world apart, he had a complete understanding of all the mysteries of the Luo scattered Tao below the peak of the Luo scattered Tao. He naturally had a complete understanding of the principle of this nameless living being's ability, as well as the basic structure that this nameless living being needed to have if it wanted to have this kind of ability. There was no ambiguity at all. It was precisely because of this that the nameless living being's ability in the world of his mind was unimaginably powerful. No matter how large the torrent of inspirational thoughts was, no matter how large the amount of inspirational thoughts was, it was easily accommodated by the living being, and it did not cause any changes to its original form. According to the settings, these inspirational thoughts will continue to ferment and transform in its body. Only when they can no longer be strengthened will they be expelled, Luo Fan thought. The time for this fermenting and transformation was uncertain. It could be extremely long, or it could be extremely short. But no matter what, after the fermenting and transformation, the amount of inspirational thoughts would definitely be thousands of times less than before. Then, for Luo Fan, it would no longer be able to affect his thoughts in the slightest. After dozens of breaths, a bit of inspiration shot out from the eyes of the nameless living being formed by the thoughts. It turned into an arc, gathered behind it, and directly attacked Luo Fan's mind. With a thought, Luo Fan had already obtained this bit of inspiration that had been fermenting and transformed. He calmed his mind and comprehended it. He knew that this was a kind of inspiration on how to use some method to instantly restore all of the power of the living being in battle. And looking at the various ideas and wills, it was quite feasible. It was clearly formed through the combination of many inspirational thoughts. He could not help but smile. This inspiration itself was of no use to Luo Fan. With his cultivation realm, there were millions of ways to instantly restore all of the power of the living being in battle. In fact, each of them was thousands of times more exquisite than this inspiration. However, the appearance of this inspiration meant that Luo Fan's method was very effective. This meant that the nameless living being had a great assisting effect on him, comprehending the inspiration gathered from the countless living beings. How could he not be satisfied? After resolving this sudden worry, Luo Fan split a part of his mind to comprehend the more and more inspiration shot out from the eyes of the nameless living being. He took a step and left the platform, directly appearing outside the infinite void palace, standing in that mysterious and unfathomable place in the endless starry sky. He turned around and saw a door that was about 3 meters tall standing behind him. This door was gray and hazy. The frame that formed the door seemed to be casually built from some kind of gray stone. It seemed incomparably simple and unadorned. It even contained some kind of indescribable desolation and some kind of supreme pressure. And within the frame of the door was also gray and hazy, as if this door led to endless chaos. This door looked so crude at first glance, but as long as one took a closer look, one would discover that the construction of this door contained endless mysteries. Every line, every pattern, every rise and fall, every trace of aura on the door seemed to contain endless truths of the world and the mysteries of space-time. The entire door seemed to be the product of the condensation and materialization of countless great Taos. Just by standing there, it naturally constructed a strange region with a circumference of hundreds of millions of miles. In this strange area, time and space seemed to be completely independent from the outside world, and it was even to the extent that the supreme Grand Taos seemed to have been excluded from this area, causing this area to possess its own unique principle that was completely different from the outside world, and it moved about with completely different laws. This door was the main body of the infinite void palace. For Luo Fan, as long as he stepped through this door, he would be able to enter any world or region within the limitless void palace, including the platform in the void. for other living beings. Stepping through this door would only bring them to the place that Luo Fan was willing to open to. With a slight thought from Luo Fan, the simple and unadorned door trembled slightly, and all of its aura abruptly converged. Although its appearance did not change in the slightest, it gave off the feeling that it was the most ordinary and ordinary door. The various wonderful auras, strange feelings, and even its influence on the surrounding hundreds of millions of miles were instantly eliminated, as if they didn't exist at all. Then, this door gently floated to the back of Luo Fan's head. With a shake, it disappeared into nothingness, leaving only a shadow behind his head that was tightly connected to him. Even the phantom image slowly faded and eventually disappeared without a trace. The entire limitless Void Palace had been completely integrated into Luo Fan's body through some mysterious method. At this moment, the connection between him and the limitless Void Palace had become incomparably strange and mysterious. This connection made it impossible for any living being, even if their cultivation realm was higher than Luo Fan's, to find the existence of the infinite Void Palace in his body. However, as long as Luo Fan was willing, the infinite Void Palace could directly turn void into reality and explode with earth-shattering power. After doing all this, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly and his perception spread out. In an instant, all the changes that were happening in the entire primordial world, as well as the endless starry sky, were included in his perception. Of course, this kind of perception naturally had a difference in details, as well as a difference in clarity. The closer he was to him, the more detailed his perception was, and the clearer his perception was. The further away he was from him, the simpler this feeling was, and the more blurry his perception was. The reason for this was naturally rather simple. This was because this kind of perception was brought about by Luo Fan after he obtained the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit and achieved the Zenith Heaven Dispelling Tao. Although this kind of perception was mysterious, there were also restrictions. It was not omnipotent, which was why there was such a difference. This kind of perception had various restrictions and could not allow him to completely understand and grasp the entire primordial world and the endless starry sky. However, it was enough for Luo Fan to completely understand the situation of the entire primordial world. This seemed unbelievable, but in reality, it was not difficult to understand at all. This was because the current dangerous situation of the entire primordial world had reached an unimaginable level. Killing intent filled the world, and the entire endless starry sky was almost completely shattered. The entire primordial world was constantly shaking, and billions of different strengths and weaknesses were fighting crazily in the entire primordial world and the endless starry sky. In such a situation, anyone with a bit of clarity would be able to easily see the truth, let alone Luo Fan. Hashtag free ebook download. Chapter 677. As expected, it has developed to this point. Luo Fan's expression was extremely calm, and such a thought flashed through his mind. First written text, free ebook download. What caused such a huge change in the primordial world was none other than the battle between Luo Fan's two disciples, Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao. In other words, it was caused by the battle between the human clan and the demon clan for the main character of the world. At this moment, it had been 9 years since Ao Lai and Ao Yin left the Void Wuji Palace and entered the primordial world. 9 years ago, it was the end of Luo Fan's first transformation of the Void Wuji Palace. At that time, the most precious matter of the Void Wuji Palace, which contained the most Daos, left the Void Wuji Palace and mixed with the other matters before. It directly fell into the primordial world, and under the control of some inexplicable rules of the primordial world, it directly landed on the treasure-divided island, triggering the battle between the human clan and the demon clan on the treasure-divided island. At that time, the commander of the human clan on the treasure-divided island was Zhu Xingzi. Although he did not hold a position in the Daluo dynasty, he was inextricably linked to the Daluo dynasty. He was also an extremely famous human cultivator among the itinerant cultivators. His cultivation was at the half-step golden immortal realm. In the entire primordial world, he was considered an existence with the highest cultivation level. The commander of the demon clan was the Sky Demon Emperor, but his identity was not as complicated as Zhu Xingzi's. After all, the entire demon clan, except for the demon clan that did not have a complete spiritual consciousness, was unified and under the control of Lei Jiuxiao. They were all under the control of the demon clan elders. Therefore, Zhu Xingzi was directly appointed by the elders to guard the treasure-divided island this time. His cultivation was also at the half-step golden immortal realm, and he was also famous in the primordial world. Before the battle began, to the two of them, the task of guarding the treasure-divided island was just a simple task. Even if they were to fight, they would still restrain themselves. They would not truly throw caution to the wind and attack. It was just like the many mysterious treasures that had descended from the heavens in the past. It was only to determine a victor and not a life and death battle. However, when the mysterious treasure descended from the heavens that time, they knew at the same time that the situation this time was completely different from the previous times. This was because the most precious treasure that had descended from the heavens was a supreme treasure that recorded the method to create a world and could even support this method to create a complete world on it. Although there were 296 billion grotto heaven worlds that existed independently in the primordial world, they did not think that grotto heaven worlds were precious. In fact, if the 296 billion square grotto heaven worlds were scattered throughout the entire primordial world, it would be like throwing a handful of sand into a desert. One could imagine how rare they were. Therefore, although the 296 billion square grotto heaven worlds had appeared for more than 100 yuan hui, and the entire primordial world had experienced indescribable development during these 100 yuan hui, the number of grotto heaven worlds that had been discovered was less than 1%. Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao clearly knew that there were as many as 296 billion square grotto heaven worlds, but no matter how they searched, even if they turned the entire primordial world upside down, they could only find less than 10 million square grotto heaven worlds. 10 million square grotto heaven worlds seemed to be a lot, as if they were everywhere. However, don't forget that the number of the human clan and demon clan had already reached an unimaginable level. Even if one used trillions as a unit, this number would probably exceed the limit that could be described with numbers. With such a large number of grotto heaven worlds, even 100 billion people might not be able to share one grotto heaven world. Under such circumstances, one could imagine how precious the grotto heaven worlds were. Even Zhu Xingzi and the Sky Demon King, who were half a step into the golden immortal realm, could only enter dozens of grotto heaven worlds at will. Even if they wanted to enter these grotto heaven worlds, they had to restrain themselves. It was not easy to obtain the resources of those grotto heaven worlds. From this, one could see how precious a method that could open up a world and a treasure that could support the opening of a grotto heaven world was to them. As a result, after learning that the most precious treasure recorded the method to create a world and could allow people to create a world on it at will, Zhu Xingzi and the Sky Demon Emperor completely cast aside their restraint and began to fight without caring about anything else. Both of them were the commanders of one camp on the treasure-divided island. Their attitude naturally determined the attitude of both camps. The two of them fought desperately, naturally causing the cultivators of the two camps on the entire treasure-divided island to start fighting crazily. And this meant that the battle on the treasure-divided island would be unprecedentedly intense. The amount of blood that would be spilled would be unprecedented. The strength of the human clan and demon clan were similar. In order to deal with each other, the strength of the people stationed on this treasure-divided island would naturally not be too different. When the two sides with almost the same strength fought, the intensity of the battle could be imagined. This battle lasted for an entire month. When the battle was over, the number of living beings on the entire treasure-divided island was reduced to 1 in 10,000. Only a few people were left to obtain most of the treasures on the entire treasure-divided island. And even the few people who were left were on the verge of collapse. They were extremely miserable. Among these few people, there was only the demon clan camp, not the human clan camp. in the battle between Zhu Xingzi and the Sky Demon King. Due to a coincidence, he failed. The treasure that recorded the method to create a world and could support the creation of a world fell into the hands of the Sky Demon King. At the same time, it fell into the hands of the Monster Clan. When the battle ended, the few remaining Demon Clan members looked at each other. They only felt exhausted and numb. The intensity of this battle was far beyond their imagination. Although the Human Clan and Demon Clan were hostile to each other, this kind of hostility could not completely restrict the relationship between the Human Clan and Demon Clan, nor could it isolate the possible emotions between them. Therefore, although many Human Clan and Demon Clan joined the fight for the treasure-divided island, they also had many friends and companions in the other side's camp. Most of them joined the fight because they wanted to take risks together. However, they didn't expect that this fight would actually develop into such an abnormally bloody battle. It actually caused the entire treasure-divided island to flow like a river of blood. Out of the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, only a few of them were left. In addition, this treasure-divided island had unknowingly endured the gathering of the entire primordial world's evil spirit, causing the minds of these surviving cultivators to collapse. Although they belonged to the same camp, there were all kinds of conflicts between them after all. These conflicts could naturally be suppressed under normal circumstances, but under this kind of mental breakdown, these conflicts skyrocketed by countless times, causing them to completely lose self-control and actually start to continue fighting. The Heavenly Demon King and Zhu Xingzi's cultivation realm were similar. It was already rare for him to be able to defeat Zhu Xingzi by chance and destroy him. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be unharmed in the process. At that time, when the battle ended and his mind relaxed, all the injuries he suffered in the battle broke out, causing him to only have a slight ability to move, so he no longer had any combat power. This battle suddenly broke out again, but it caused him to die in the hands of an itinerant, immortal realm Demon Clan cultivator. He had been fighting for it for a month, and had exhausted all his efforts to kill a half-step golden immortal cultivator. But now, it had fallen into the hands of the itinerant immortal Demon Clan. However, the Demon Clan cultivator's luck wasn't much better than the Heavenly Demon King's. After the treasure fell into his hands, he was killed directly. This kind of fighting process continued. In the end, only the last Demon Clan cultivator that was cultivated from an ant relied on his super strong body to obtain the final victory, although this victory caused him to lose half of his body and make him seriously injured and on the verge of death. After winning, the Demon Clan cultivator stayed in a daze for a few days. Finally, he completely woke up and knew that he had caused a huge disaster. In for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound. He simply plundered all the treasures that fell from the sky. He even collected all the humans and Demon Clan on the entire island, including the bodies of Zhu Xingzi and the Heavenly Demon King. He wanted to turn them into cultivation materials. After that, he activated a certain Heavenly Demon King's magic treasure and directly destroyed the entire treasure-divided island, making it disappear from the world. After destroying the treasure-divided island, the Demon Clan cultivator hurriedly flew away and disappeared without trace. After a few more days, when the dispute on the treasure-divided island would come to an end no matter what, cultivators of the half-step golden immortal realm from both sides came to the place where the treasure-divided island was located to search for the remaining living beings of the two clans. However, what they saw was a vast ocean. The treasure-divided island had long been completely erased, as if there had never been such an island in the entire world. And from the traces, they could only see that it was the traces of the famous magic treasure of the Heavenly Demon King. In an instant, the human camp determined that the Heavenly Demon King did not abide by the rules. After winning, he directly used a magic treasure to destroy the treasure-divided island, cutting off the chance of the treasures falling from the sky. The Demon Clan naturally wouldn't admit it. Instead, they mocked the human camp for being despicable. They destroyed the treasure-divided island and wanted to bite back. Just like that, the two sides scolded each other on the surface of the sea. If it was during normal times, this kind of scolding was just a common thing for them. They would definitely restrain themselves and scold each other. it wouldn't develop into anything more serious. However, don't forget that the ruins of the treasure-divided island was where a huge amount of evil aura gathered. Even a half-step golden immortal realm, heavenly demon king, and Zhu Xingzi couldn't be completely immune to this evil aura. Naturally, it was even more impossible for them to be immune to it, since they were also half-step golden immortals. Thus, this scolding unknowingly developed into a battle, and the battle developed into a fight. The fight developed into a fight to the death. In the end, the fight between the two sides finally attracted the attention of the two camps far away in the primordial world. It also attracted the attention of Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao. Luo Fu was originally looking for an excuse to determine the victor with the demon clan. He naturally couldn't let go of such a good opportunity. He immediately insisted that the demon clan had evil intentions and wanted the demon clan to hand over the heavenly demon king. Lei Jiuxiao already knew Luo Fu's intentions, so he naturally wouldn't take this excuse to heart. Taking a step back, the heavenly demon king was already dead. Even if he wanted to hand it over, he definitely couldn't. How would he agree? Under such circumstances, the dispute between the two camps could no longer be suppressed. In the next extremely short period of time, the entire primordial world's human clan and demon clan began to fight. At first, this battle was still restrained. Both sides restricted their own strength and tried their best not to destroy the environment of the primordial world. However, since the battle began, the process was no longer in the control of both sides. Even Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao gradually lost control of their respective camps. The dispute continued to escalate. The power invested in each other became stronger and stronger, and the damage to the primordial world became more and more serious. When the last grotto heaven was destroyed in the battle between the two golden immortals, Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao finally completely lost control of this battle. The human clan and the demon clan no longer cared about anything. They no longer cared about the damage the battle would cause to the primordial world. They no longer cared about the consequences of using their power. In their eyes and hearts, there was only their opponent, their enemy. Under such circumstances, the scope of the battle became larger and larger, and the damage caused by the battle became stronger and stronger. At this time, almost the entire endless starry sky was affected by the battle. In almost every area of the untainted land, there were battles between the human clan and the demon clan. As for those grotto heaven worlds, there was no need to mention them. Generally, grotto heaven worlds were known to Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao. When these grotto heaven worlds were formed, they had a share in Luo Fan's place to comprehend the various mysteries revealed when these grotto heaven worlds were formed. Naturally, they also knew the location of many grotto heaven worlds. Therefore, apart from some extremely special grotto heaven worlds that were located too close to each other's bases, most grotto heaven worlds were occupied and developed by the human clan and the demon clan together. Therefore, the first battlefield where the battle broke out was these grotto heaven worlds. The cultivation of the itinerant immortal realm, the perfected immortal realm, and the golden immortal realm was only the beginning of the entire cultivation path. They were still billions of miles away from the peak. However, these three realms were actually quite powerful realms. The power of the divine abilities were also extremely impressive, and they were extremely powerful in the three realms. In other words, after the strength of the battle between the human clan and the demon clan increased to the itinerant immortal realm, the perfected immortal realm, and the golden immortal realm, the destructive power had already reached an unimaginable level. Because of the special rules of time and space in the primordial world, without the cultivation of the golden immortal realm, no matter how strong the power on it was, it could not distort the void of the primordial world at all. In other words, even if the power reached the golden immortal realm, as long as the cultivator who used this power had not reached the golden immortal realm, it was impossible to distort the void of the primordial world. The damage suffered in this battle was relatively less. Those grotto heaven worlds did not have such convenience. The grotto heaven world existed independently from the primordial world. Its own space-time was many times weaker than that of the primordial world. Naturally, it could not enjoy the special rules of the primordial world space-time. For most grotto heaven worlds, as long as one had the power of the itinerant immortal realm, one could easily destroy the void of the grotto heaven world like a piece of paper. If one's cultivation realm was raised to the perfected immortal realm, the grotto heaven world would be just a slightly larger eggshell. If one's cultivation realm was raised to the golden immortal realm, one divine ability was enough to make the entire grotto heaven world collapse. Under such circumstances, as soon as the battle between the human clan and the demon clan broke out, the tens of millions of grotto heaven worlds that had been discovered collapsed and destroyed at an unimaginable speed. In just a few years, all the grotto heaven worlds that had been discovered in the entire primordial world were left with only a few of the most important ones that were firmly controlled by Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao. The destruction of the grotto heaven worlds made the fighting power of both sides more concentrated in the primordial world and the endless starry sky. The scene that Luo Fan saw when he came out of the Void Wuji Palace was the scene when the battle between the human clan and the demon clan was about to reach its climax. At this moment, the void of the endless starry sky was destroyed. There were many stars in the endless starry sky, and the power of each star was extremely terrifying. It was not something that a golden immortal realm cultivator could destroy easily. However, the void of the entire endless starry sky was extremely fragile. In comparison, it was only slightly stronger than the void of the grotto heaven world, but it was far inferior to the void of the primordial world. Under such circumstances, even though none of the stars were destroyed by the battle, the boundless space was like a pile of sand. Even if a cultivator at the bodiless immortal realm fought within it, the cultivator would be able to shatter a large expanse of space with a raise of his hand, and it was even to the extent that the cultivator could rely on the energy of shattering space to guide the movement of the stars to change their trajectory to attack and crush their opponent. All these strange phenomena gathered in one place, causing the battle between the human race and the demon race to be so magnificent and earth-shattering. Of course, it was impossible to guide the stars into the primordial world by using the power of the shattering of the void of the endless starry sky to change the orbit of the stars. After all, these stars and even the entire endless starry sky existed on the primordial world. No matter how the orbit of the stars changed, even if the direction was completely reversed, it could not change this fact. Of course, it was impossible to shake the foundation of the entire primordial world. However, even if that was the case, such a huge change had gradually caused some sort of drawbacks that were getting stronger and more obvious. This drawback was nothing else but that the stars were gradually becoming chaotic. Hashtag free ebook download. Chapter 678. There were countless stars in the endless starry sky. In terms of size, these stars might not have an absolute advantage over the stars in the Earth universe. Text first. However, the power contained within was not something that the stars in the Earth universe could compare to. However, these stars were not like the stars that emitted their power in an extremely explosive manner. Instead, they were like flowing water, flowing slowly and emitting an endless amount of star essence that filled the endless starry sky and the untainted world. As a result, the form they displayed was only similar to the stars in the Earth universe. However, the difference in essence was still extremely obvious. Under the control of the supreme great Tao of the primordial world, the endless stars that contained incredible power naturally formed an extremely complicated and mysterious formation. This formation enveloped the entire endless starry sky and the entire primordial world. It formed an extremely special relationship with the primordial world. This relationship allowed the primordial world to continuously receive the star essence energy emitted by the endless stars. It was also faintly protected by the endless stars. At the same time, it allowed the endless stars to use the primordial world as the core. Every movement of the endless stars faintly matched some kind of inexplicable change in the primordial world. It was precisely because of the special nature of this formation that although it was so complicated and mysterious, it it also seemed both stable and fragile. It was stable because the entire formation was combined into one. It was an extremely stable existence to the outside world, the primordial world, and even to the primordial world. If one wanted to attack these stars from these two positions, they would suffer the backlash from the combination of the endless stars. However, in terms of fragility, it was in the endless starry sky, in the formation formed by the endless stars. Within this formation, it was as if the formation didn't exist at all. No mysterious effects could be produced, and no inconceivable power could be displayed. As long as there was the power to destroy the space in the endless starry sky, one could move the stars through the destruction of the endless starry sky, causing the trajectory of the stars to change, and thus easily destroy the perfection of the formation. Of course, the formation formed by the endless stars was far too complicated and profound. Even if millions of stars were to change their trajectories and leave the requirements of the formation, it would only be a small problem for the entire formation. At most, it would only destroy the perfection of the formation, and it would not be able to shake the foundation of the entire formation. As long as there was time, this huge formation would naturally be able to bring these stars back into the correct orbit, making this huge formation perfect again. However, such a situation was not happening in the endless starry sky. There were trillions of stars in this endless starry sky. Even at this moment, Luo Fan could only faintly sense that these boundless stars had formed an extremely profound and indescribable formation, and he was utterly unable to fully grasp this profound formation. Not to mention the other cultivators in the primordial world who were hundreds of millions of kilometers away from Luo Fan. Thus, in the war between humans and demons, the cultivators who could use various methods to draw upon the power of the stars to crush their opponents had no qualms about borrowing the power of the stars. On the contrary, he was extremely addicted to borrowing the power of the stars to fight. This was extremely natural. It should be known that the cultivation of the itinerant immortal realm in the primordial world could not even distort the void at all. Even a slightly larger mountain could not destroy it. However, in this endless starry sky, they could destroy the void at will, and even change the trajectories of the stars by relying on the order of the destruction of the void. This allowed them to easily control the power that was hundreds of millions of times more powerful than their own. Under their control, they could crush and destroy their opponents. How satisfying and wonderful was this? What's more, in the process of battle, where they were able to control a power that far exceeded their own by countless times, they could even occasionally understand the principles of using various kinds of power, thus stimulating their cultivation realm, causing the realm that they had accumulated in the rogue immortal realm for countless years to loosen. Free download of the full-text ebook. Under these conditions, how could they not be addicted to the process of drawing upon the stars to fight? It was precisely because of this addiction that the number of stars that were drawn upon increased, causing the number of stars whose trajectories were twisted to become more and more terrifying. By the time Luo Fan left the Infinite Void Palace, the number of stars whose trajectories had been twisted in the endless starry sky had reached billions. It should be known that there were hundreds of thousands of itinerant immortal realm cultivators fighting in the endless starry sky, and they had been fighting for several years. It was only natural that there would be such an outcome. This finally touched the foundation of the formation formed by the endless stars, and it finally began to affect the stability of the huge formation. When this effect appeared, there was no longer any need for other forces to draw upon the stars. The countless stars that filled the sky began to spread in all directions, and the trajectories of the stars constantly changed. The countless stars in the endless starry sky gradually became chaotic, and gradually, no traces of their original mysteries could be found. With this change, the endless starry sky also began to undergo various inexplicable changes. Large swathes of the void continued to collapse during this process, and huge spatial rifts that were large enough to devour stars streaked across the void, completely engulfing the itinerant immortal realm cultivators of the human and demon clans who could not react in time. Itinerant immortal realm cultivators had attained immortality, and possessed all sorts of mysterious powers, such as the ability to destroy the void of the endless starry sky and produce all sorts of incredible effects. However, they were only in the first realm of immortality after all. Compared to primordial immortals and zenith heavenly immortals, they were billions of times weaker, and their ability to survive was even more fragile. Under such circumstances, when the itinerant immortals were engulfed by the spatial rifts in the endless starry sky, they were directly strangled by the endless chaos behind them and turned into dust. They did not even have the chance to cry out before their souls were destroyed and their Tao vanished. In addition to the loose immortal stage cultivators, there were also a considerable number of true immortal stage cultivators. There were even a few golden immortal stage cultivators. These true immortals and golden immortals were countless times stronger than itinerant immortals, and their ability to react and survive were much stronger than itinerant immortals. As soon as the spatial rifts appeared, they instantly knew that something was amiss. They stopped fighting and used all sorts of methods to protect themselves. Therefore, when the first wave of spatial rifts appeared, none of the true immortals and golden immortals were killed by them. However, that was all there was to it. Although they could ensure their own safety, it was absolutely impossible for them to save the itinerant immortals who were affected by the rifts. Soon they no longer had the mood to pay attention to the other itinerant immortals. This was because the second wave, the third wave, the fourth wave, endless spatial rifts were arriving. In an instant, the endless starry sky seemed to have turned into the end of the world. Endless spatial rifts appeared and disappeared, covering every corner of the endless starry sky. No matter where the cultivators were, no matter what divine abilities or magic treasures they used to protect themselves, no matter how high their cultivation level was, they could no longer guarantee their own safety. They could be devoured by the rifts at any time and could be killed at any time. Their souls might be destroyed, and their bodies might vanish. The survival ability of true immortals and golden immortals was many times stronger than that of itinerant immortals, but in the face of the endless spatial rifts, they were extremely weak. Soon, after several waves of rifts passed, many true immortals died. Countless itinerant immortals died. After several waves of rifts, only tens of thousands of itinerant immortals were left. 80 to 80% of them were dead. Even the itinerant immortals who survived were not because they were strong enough to survive in the rifts, but because they were lucky and had quick reactions. They were in areas with fewer rifts, so they could barely avoid the rifts when they appeared. Although there were several waves of rifts, they happened in an extremely short period of time. Everything happened in just a few breaths. When this happened, a sense of panic and helplessness instantly spread among the cultivators of the human and demon clans. What's going on? Has the world been destroyed by us? For a moment, this kind of panic thought kept echoing in the minds of all living beings. The entire endless starry sky and the entire untainted land were enveloped by the netherworld network. Naturally, they were also covered by the virtual world. After more than 100 periods of development, the current virtual world had developed to an incredible level. It was even larger and tighter than the untainted land. Even the civilization seemed to be more developed than the untainted land. The various means of communication and the spiritual sense network that was based on the virtual world had been established to an unimaginable degree. Even an ordinary mortal or an ordinary creature could easily see what was happening on the other side from this corner of the untainted land. Therefore, when such a drastic change occurred in the endless starry sky, all the cultivators of the human and demon clans who were fighting the ordinary creatures and the ordinary members of the human and demon clans in the untainted land instantly stopped what they were doing. Those with poor eyesight and perception observed the drastic change in the endless starry sky through all kinds of incredible methods that had been developed in the virtual world for more than 100 periods. Those with good eyesight and powerful perception directly looked up at the void, at the endless starry sky that even the 9 layers of astral wind, lightning, and fire could not block, and directly observed the drastic change that was happening in the endless starry sky. The reason why they reacted so quickly was that at the moment the endless starry sky changed, all living beings in the untainted land, regardless of whether they were up or down, inside or outside, regardless of where they were, regardless of whether they were strong or weak, instantly felt an indescribable pressure surging into their hearts. This kind of pressure was far stronger than any living being had ever felt before. It made all living beings feel as if death was right beside them, and they could be controlled at any time. Under such circumstances, how could they not pay attention to it? How could they not care about the source of this pressure? The entire virtual world was so prosperous and perfect. How could it be difficult for all living beings to find the source of this pressure? Naturally, they could easily find the source of the pressure. It was the endless starry sky above the entire untainted land. In contrast to the indescribable pressure that surged in the hearts of all living beings, there was a slow but firm tremor that appeared in the entire primordial world that spread across the entire primordial world. This kind of vibration was different from the vibration caused by the battles between the human and demon clans in various parts of the untainted land. Although the vibration caused by the battle was extremely powerful, the area it affected was not large. In other words, the area affected by each source of the vibration was not large. This difference in range didn't put too much pressure on even the living beings within the range of the shockwaves. At most, they could feel the ground shaking and the intensity of the battle. However, at this moment, this kind of slow but firm vibration that spread throughout the entire primordial world, from the inside to the outside, from the incomparably deep underground to the infinitely high sky, made every living being feel an indescribable fear. This kind of fear had nothing to do with cultivation. Even Luo Fu, Lei Jiuxiao, Ao Lai, Ao Yin, and the others, who were at the peak of the golden immortal realm and could even use various methods to obtain the power of grand unity, were no exception. The reason for this was very simple. It was because all the living beings in the untainted land could not exist beyond the untainted land. To them, the untainted land was their home, the place that supported their survival. Usually, they would turn a blind eye to such a vast, untainted land. However, at this moment, when they personally felt that the entire untainted land was shaking violently and the entire untainted land seemed to be collapsing and being destroyed, they finally felt the fear of having nowhere to rely on. They could die at any time, be destroyed at any time, and be destroyed at any time. This kind of survival fear, no matter how profound one's cultivation realm was or how perfect one's mental state was, one would definitely not be immune to it. At most, cultivators with a perfect mental state could quickly control this kind of fear and not let this kind of fear affect the clarity of their minds. They would not let this kind of fear completely control their hearts, just like Luo, Fu, and the others at this moment. Looks like we've gone too far this time. I wonder how Father will punish us this time. At this moment, Luo Fu floated above Tianjing and sensed the vibrations in the void. He raised his head to look at the endless starry sky above his head as such thoughts flashed through his mind. At this moment, countless complicated talismans, characters, and runes formed around Luo Fu, and then space was directly torn apart. 3 figures broke through the void and appeared beside Luo Fu. These 3 people were 2 women and 1 man. The 2 women were peerlessly beautiful, and they emitted an indescribable aura of power and nobility. However, one of the women looked more mature, and the power on her body was more powerful. The divine light in her eyes was more condensed and profound. Although the other woman's aura was also shocking and noble, her eyes were still pure. Even at this moment, there was still some curiosity in her eyes. On the other hand, the body of the man that had just appeared emitted a yang aura, and the power around him was shocking. As the power in his body surged, it faintly merged with a certain aspect of the heavens and the earth, and they seemed to be resonating with each other. These 2 women and 1 man were none other than Guang Pu, Luo Gua, and Luo Chunyang. After the 3 of them appeared, they exchanged glances with Luo Fu's group of 4. The fear that originally existed in their eyes had completely disappeared, and there was only indifference without regret. Clearly, at the moment when the entire untainted world seemed to be on the verge of collapse, although they were scattered throughout the untainted world, at the last moment, they had activated the teleportation system that Luo Fu had used all the power of the Daluo Empire and spent tens of thousands of years to teleport back to Tianjing. They had arrived at Luo Fu's side, and they wanted to live and die together with Luo Fu. Father, grandfather definitely won't let you off so easily this time, right? Luo Gui said to Luo Fu with a grin. You talk too much. Luo Fu raised his eyebrows and scolded with a smile. That's hard to say. This matter was completely caused by you and Uncle Master. Perhaps grandfather will teach you a good lesson this time and lock you up for hundreds of millions of years. Luo Guo was naturally not afraid of Luo Fu, and she still said with a grin. During this process, Guang Pu and Luo Chunyang only stood quietly at the side, waiting for the beautiful or not beautiful fate that was about to arrive. They did not say a word. But it was this scene that appeared so warm and meaningful in this situation where the entire world seemed to be on the verge of destruction. If your grandfather wants to punish you, your Uncle Master and I definitely won't be able to escape, but you probably won't be able to avoid some punishment as well. Don't think that you'll be fine just because you helped. Luo Fu chuckled. At this moment, although there was still fear in his heart, it had already faded to the point that it was almost undetectable. After all, he had absolute confidence in Luo Fan. He believed that even if the situation had collapsed to such an extent, as long as his father, Luo Fan, took action, the matter would definitely be completely resolved. Moreover, even if Luo Fan could not resolve the matter, the entire world would collapse, and they would die because of it. He would no longer have any regrets. They would die in the process of pursuing their goals, and before they died, they would be able to gather together as a family and live and die together. What was there to be dissatisfied about? Since there were no regrets, there was naturally no need to talk about fear. That's hard to say. No matter what, we're just accomplices, while you're the main culprits. As long as you take all the responsibility and say that you forced me to do it, and I was only forced to do it, grandfather dotes on me so much, so he definitely won't blame me. Who knows? I might not even have to bear any punishment, Luo Gui said with a proud expression. Clearly, she strongly disagreed with what Luo Fu had said. Hashtag free ebook download. Chapter 679. Luo Fu only shook his head and smiled when he heard Luo Gui's words, but he did not say anything else. Text first. For a time, a warm atmosphere permeated around Luo Fu and his family of four in this doomsday-like atmosphere, greatly reducing the fear in their hearts. At this time, Luo Fu was a supreme existence at the peak of the golden immortal realm. He could also break through the shackles by drawing on the power of will of the billions of lives in the Daluo dynasty, and possessed the supreme power that only Tai could possess. As for Guang Pu, although he did not have the mysterious power of using the power of vow to reach primordial unity like Luo Fu, his own cultivation realm had reached the peak of the golden immortal realm. He was only a step away from attaining the primordial unity Dao fruit. Luo Chunyang and Luo Gua, who were by Guang Pu's side, did not have as much accumulation as Luo Fu and Guang Pu. Therefore, although they had made great progress in the past 100 or so periods and obtained unimaginable improvements, they had only reached the half-step golden immortal realm. In the entire primordial world, they were naturally a relatively powerful existence, but at this time they were only existences at the bottom. Even here, with such powerful forces gathered, they could only quietly wait for the arrival of the end of the world, waiting for the fate of destruction. However, there was no fear in their eyes. Standing there, although everyone felt a little regretful, they didn't feel any remorse or resentment. To be able to face the arrival of the end of the world with the people closest to them was an extremely fortunate thing for anyone. Perhaps the only regret they had was that there were still many people they had not met, and there were still many things they wanted to do that they had not done. Suddenly, Luo Fu raised his eyebrows, and an inexplicably complicated expression appeared on his face. He smiled bitterly and said, "Since 6 junior brothers already here, why don't you show yourself?" As soon as he finished speaking, Guangpu also discovered something. Then, Luo Chunyang and Luo Guo both turned their gazes toward a certain spot in the void. Second senior brother's senses are indeed sharp. I never thought that I wouldn't be able to escape from senior brother's senses, even though I'm hiding in a crack in space. At that moment, a clear voice rang out from the void. Then, a man in a long robe stepped out from the void. As soon as this man appeared, the surrounding void was naturally filled with an indescribable pressure of the Son of Heaven. It was as if this person was the absolute master of the entire world, the entire universe. He was the supreme Son of Heaven who controlled infinite time and space. Under the stimulation of the Emperor's might, Luo Fu's Emperor's aura trembled and instantly spread out, clashing with the Emperor's might. Under the stalemate, both of them continued to rise. Gradually, like two columns of smoke rising into the sky, they surged from Tianjing and even shook the gap between the endless starry sky and the primordial world, causing the scene reflected by the endless starry sky above to tremble slightly. It was as if the gap was about to be broken, causing the entire endless starry sky to undergo an even more incredible change. The man who appeared through the void was none other than Lei Jiuxiao. Lei Jiuxiao was able to rely on his own strength to fight Luo Fu, who had the help of many companions, for more than 100 yuan hui without being at a disadvantage at all. His methods were naturally extremely ingenious. Although Tianjing had endless defenses and could almost be said to be the place with the tightest defenses in the entire chaos world, he also had some methods to pass through these defenses and directly enter Tianjing. However, it was meaningless under normal circumstances. Even if he subdued Luo Fu, it would be impossible for him to affect the situation of the battle. Just the power gathered in Tianjing was not something that Lei Jiuxiao could compare to. Even if he entered, he would only be delivering himself to death. How could he subdue Luo Fu? Therefore, although he had found a way to enter and exit Tianjing a long time ago, he had never personally stepped into this place. Until this moment. At this moment, a long streak of light streaked across the sky and instantly crossed a distance of millions of kilometers. It directly landed beside Luo Fu and split into a man and a woman. It was Ao Lai and Ao Yin. The two of them were not far from Tianjing. However, because Luo Fu and his family of four were here, they did not want to disturb them, so they did not show themselves. At this moment, they suddenly saw Lei Jiuxiao appear with an astonishing pressure, but they were worried about Luo Fu. In the end, they tore through the sky to protect Luo Fu. However, their arrival did not truly attract the attention of Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao. At this moment, Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao only had eyes for each other. Apart from each other, everything else was nothing to them. This naturally included Ao Lai and Ao Yin. After a long while, the Emperor's aura on Luo Fu and the Emperor's pressure on Lei Jiuxiao collapsed almost at the same time, then completely disappeared. In a trance, while Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao were still the same two people, the feeling that they gave off was completely different from before. They no longer had the aura that did not belong to them. Instead, two born bodies of Taoism were revealed. Two figures that were obviously cultivators with extremely high levels of cultivation. Guangpu's cultivation level was no lower than Luo Fu's, and her understanding of Luo Fu was beyond everyone's imagination. She immediately knew what had happened and understood. From now on, Tianhuang Grand Emperor no longer exists in this world, and there is no demon ancestor. As expected, after this thought, Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao looked at each other and smiled. There was no longer any hostility in their eyes. Lei Jiuxiao took a step forward and came directly in front of Luo Fu. He bowed and said, "Jiuxiao pays his respects to second senior brother. I hope second senior brother can forgive me if I have offended you over the years." "Sixth junior brother, what are you talking about? If it were not for you, how could I have achieved what I have today?" Luo Fu smiled and helped Lei Jiuxiao up. This scene made Guangpu nod and smile, but Ao Lai and Ao Yin, who were next to her, were completely confused. What's going on? The battle between the two of them has led the entire untainted land to destruction, but the two of them act as if nothing has happened between them. They're even treating each other with respect. The two looked at each other and felt that they had been separated from the untainted land for too long and could not understand the thoughts of all living beings in the untainted land. Disciple Lei Jiuxiao pays his respects to third senior sister. At this moment, Lei Jiuxiao started to greet Guang Pu. Guang Pu hurriedly returned the greeting with a smile and said, "Sixth junior brother. Sixth junior brother has really pushed us to the limit in these past few years. I'm ashamed. I have no choice but to do so for the sake of pursuing the Grand Tao." Lei Jiuxiao smiled as well. After that, Luo Chunyang and Luo Guo bowed to Lei Jiuxiao, and then Lei Jiuxiao bowed to Ao Lai and Ao Yin. After this, it seemed as if they were meeting fellow disciples on a bright and beautiful spring morning, and the tremors that existed everywhere in the surroundings of the untainted land seemed as if they didn't exist at all. If others were to see this sort of composure, they would probably collapse on the spot and wonder if they were hallucinating. But at this moment, it seemed to be so natural, and it seemed as if it was abnormal if it wasn't like this. After the greetings, Luo Fu chuckled and said to Lei Jiuxiao, "Sixth junior brother, it seems that there's no need to discuss the outcome of this battle anymore, right?" Lei Jiuxiao sighed and said, "Naturally, there's no need to discuss the outcome of this battle anymore. In terms of ordinary cultivators, the human race outnumbers the demon race by several times. In terms of the higher-ups, although the demon race can hold their own against the human race, with the addition of 2 elders, the demon race is definitely no match for the human race. Naturally, second senior brother wins." Luo Chunyang frowned and finally opened his mouth to ask, "Sixth martial uncle, this situation doesn't seem to have only changed today. Instead, it was already like this several years ago before the big battle even happened. Why didn't sixth martial uncle admit defeat back then, and only came today?" Although Luo Chunyang did not feel too much regret being able to face the arrival of the apocalypse with his parents, there were still some regrets in his heart. As a result, Luo Chunyang could not help but feel indignant when he saw Lei Jiuxiao admit defeat so easily and calmly. As a result, he spoke in an almost questioning tone. His words made Luo Fu frown. Just as he was about to reprimand Lei Jiuxiao, he saw Lei Jiuxiao raise his hand to stop him. Back then, all of our forces were intact, and we had all sorts of geographical advantages. Although the human race was stronger, the demon race wasn't completely defenseless. The outcome was naturally uncertain, and even if I wanted to admit defeat, no one in the demon race would agree. But it's different now. The world is about to collapse, and the battle is nearing its end. The majority of the demon race's forces have been destroyed, and we no longer have any geographical advantages. Even if I don't want to admit defeat, there's nothing I can do. Lei Jiuxiao didn't mind Luo Chunyang's question at all and explained with a smile. Being able to cultivate to the half-step golden immortal stage, Luo Chunyang's intelligence was naturally clear. He only needed a little thought to understand what Lei Jiuxiao said, so he was rendered speechless. After Lei Jiuxiao finished his explanation, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. 3 profound clones that seemed to be explaining and evolving the will of the Son of Heaven appeared out of thin air behind him. After the 3 clones appeared, they gently raised their 6 hands and made a grabbing motion in the direction of Lei Jiuxiao's hand. Then, an invisible and intangible existence constantly gathered towards the place where Lei Jiuxiao had made a grabbing motion. It gradually condensed into a mysterious ball of light. This ball of light exuded a formless and colorless radiance. In a trance, one would easily overlook it. However, as long as one could see the ball of light, they would involuntarily focus all their attention on it, and sense the incomparably profound will that was emanating from the ball of light. Luo Fu's eyes lit up when he saw the mysterious ball of light. This is the fulcrum of the demon race's providence. That's right, Lei Jiuxiao said with a strained expression. Providence was an incomparably mysterious existence. It didn't have a physical, incorporeal body, or even a place that could be referred to. Although it existed in reality, it was only a tilt of the primordial world's supreme, great Tao. Seriously speaking, it was not much different from not existing. In other words, no matter how formidable one's cultivation was, or how profound one's cultivation was, one would at most be able to see the distribution of karmic luck and sense its existence. Yet one would absolutely be unable to seize karmic luck, gather karmic luck, or transfer karmic luck. After all, it was not much different from not existing to cultivators. As for something that did not exist, no matter how profound their cultivation was, so what? However, since Providence was a certain tilt of the primordial world's supreme great Tao, its tilted target and tilted main body naturally existed. It was like a surging river. There had to be a certain location that was its final destination. To the river, this destination was its final destination. To a certain tilt of the supreme great Tao, it was the tilted target and the main body. In other words, it was the fulcrum of Providence. Under the communication of the virtual world, the cultivation civilization in the primordial world had already flourished to an unimaginable level. The theory of Providence had naturally been raised long ago, and it had even been proven many times. Lei Jiuxiao had controlled the demon race for more than 100 yuan Wei, and Luo Fu had also been the heavenly wasteland emperor for more than 100 yuan Wei. He was naturally not unfamiliar with this theory. Therefore, in the process of the stalemate for more than 100 yuan Hui, he originally just wanted to win, suppress the other party, and become the main character of the world. Under the guidance of this theory, the vague goal gradually turned into a specific goal. Among them, the most important one was to obtain the other party's providence. As long as he obtained the other party's providence, in the eyes of the primordial world, the other party's race had already been fused with his race. All the providence of the other party's race would naturally be completely added to his race. When the entire primordial world was dominated by the human race and the demon race, obtaining the other party's providence would naturally be equivalent to becoming the main character of the entire primordial world. Naturally, he had achieved his original goal. Since he wanted to obtain the other party's providence, he naturally had to be prepared to be seized by the other party. In other words, he had to have an incomparably deep understanding of his own race's providence. As a result, during the past 100 yuan Hui, Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao constantly sensed the tilt of the supreme great Tao of the entire primordial world. They sensed the faint source behind the changes that occurred in the entire human race and demon race. After countless experiments, they finally completely grasped the fulcrum of Providence. In fact, at a certain period of time and in a certain era, every race would definitely have a member who carried all the hopes of the race. In other words, at a certain period of time and in a certain era, the fulcrum of each race's providence would definitely exist on a member of a certain race. This was not difficult to understand. The fulcrum of a race represented the tilt of the supreme great Tao of the entire primordial world. It represented the tilt of the supreme great Tao. For a race, in order for the race to obtain benefits and strengthen the race, it was naturally impossible to just allow the race to obtain some benefits. Instead, it had to be specific to certain members of the race, allowing certain members of the race to obtain certain benefits and obtain certain opportunities. In the end, only then would the race be able to obtain benefits and obtain opportunities, allowing the race to continue to strengthen. And among these members, there would definitely be a member who was far more important than the others. The benefits obtained by that member would be able to maximize the benefits for the entire race, and the opportunities obtained by that member would be able to maximize the benefits for the entire race. This member could be said to be the fulcrum of the race's providence. Without the fulcrum, the providence would have no support and would naturally dissipate. Clearly, during this period of time, when the human race and demon race were fighting for the lead of the world, the fulcrum of the human race's providence rested on Luo Fu, and the fulcrum of the demon race's providence naturally rested on Lei Jiuxiao. After discovering this, Luo Fu and Lei Jiuxiao were both surprised, but also felt that it was only natural. What they did not expect was that they were so important to the race that they actually carried the entire race's providence. Naturally, it was because they had thought through everything they had done for the race over the past 100 or so periods. Apart from them, who else could bear the fulcrum of the demon race's providence? Second senior brother, there's no need to stand on ceremony. In any case, the world is about to be destroyed, and the demon race is about to lose in the battle for the lead of the world. Even if this fulcrum of the demon race remains on me, it will soon dissipate. Senior brother, as long as you fuse this fulcrum of the demon race and the human race into yourself, you will naturally possess the providence of the entire demon race and the human race. You will become the lead of the entire primordial world and obtain supreme opportunities. You might even be able to directly break through and obtain a grand unity Dao fruit. You can say that you're making use of trash. Lei Jiuxiao smiled. When Luo Fu heard Lei Jiuxiao's words, he knew that it was the truth. Therefore, although he was extremely excited, he only raised his hand and pointed. An invisible existence penetrated his hand and directly charged into the ball of light in Lei Jiuxiao's hand. The ball of light trembled slightly and then directly floated towards him. In a trance, it had completely fused into his body. After the ball of light had completely fused into his body, Luo Fu let out a long sigh. Thank you for your help, sixth junior brother. If I become successful in the future, I will definitely not forget sixth junior brother's kindness. Second senior brother, you're too kind. Since we're fellow disciples of the same sect, we naturally have to love each other. Otherwise, how can we face our master? After the fulcrum of the demon race's providence fused into Luo Fu's body, the three clones behind Lei Jiuxiao's head disappeared again. He seemed much more relaxed. After he finished speaking, he glanced at Guang Pu and the others with a somewhat complicated expression. He thought to himself, it's a pity that if second senior brother didn't have so many people to help him, the outcome of the battle for the blessings of the human and demon race would not have been like this. Even the outcome of the battle would not have developed to this point. Sigh. Naturally, Luo Fu could see how complicated Lei Jiuxiao's emotions were. Therefore, he did not provoke Lei Jiuxiao. After bowing, he did not say anything else. He quietly sensed the changes after he obtained the fulcrum of the demon race's providence. At this moment, it seemed that the entire untainted world was about to be destroyed, and they seemed to be about to die. Even if they obtained supreme benefits, there was no place for them to use them. However, Luo Fu would not give up on any thoughts of improving himself. He could die without regrets. Moreover, he had absolute confidence that his father, the supreme Dao sovereign Luo Fan, would definitely take action. Perhaps death was not as close as he had imagined. Hashtag